Hi guys, today we're going to explore how to survive and even enjoy life in early 20th century New York. Imagine you've just left your homeland, stepped off a steamship, and instantly been swallowed by the chaos of the city's noise. No more pretty postcards. The first thing to greet you is the thick coal smoke clinging to your collar, the whistle of the ship, the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestone, and someone yelling in a language you haven't had time to learn. A shove on your shoulder reminds you, here, no one gives way just because you're new. Ellis Island appears ahead. It sounds like a gateway to the American dream, but it looks more like a ticket booth for a massive machine. So, do you think you can survive here? Among the smell of burnt grease, the cold wind, and the crush of thousands of people? If you want to find out, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because this journey doesn't end at the dock. By the way, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? It's just dawn here, but maybe it's midnight or lunchtime where you are. Let me know in the comments so I can picture who's walking into this story with me. Alright, back to the moment your foot hits the first damp wooden plank of this city. The water ripples, reflecting buildings so gray, they look like someone painted them with smoke. In the distance, a plume of smoke rises, swallowing the last patch of blue sky. A loud shout from the dock worker echoes, and you suddenly realize you don't understand a single word. In that moment, you understand you're the newcomer, and believe me, everyone else knows it too. On the pier, the crowd pushes like it's the last boat leaving this world. A child clutches their mother's hand so tightly both hands have gone pale. Wind from the Hudson slips down your collar, bringing a strange chill that makes you shiver. You pull your old coat tighter, telling yourself this is the start of something good. Or at least you want to believe it is. You follow the crowd off the dock, down narrow streets filled with horse-drawn carriages and loud street vendors. Every step comes with the feeling someone's eyes are scanning your pockets. Your guide leads you to a tall, damp building they call a tenement, a shared housing block. The wooden stairs creak, as if protesting every footstep. The hallway is so narrow that if two people walk in opposite directions, one has to turn sideways to pass. The smell of boiled cabbage from downstairs mixes with years of damp brick walls. Your room's door is just a thin plank, shaking at the slightest knock. Inside, a bent iron bed with a sagging mattress looks ready to swallow whoever lies on it. The tiny window is only the size of a book, opening to the wall of the building next door. You try to sit, and the springs creak like they've just been woken from decades of sleep. In the corner sits a basin of murky water, cold enough to numb your bones with a single touch. You're not sure if it's for drinking or just washing, and no one gives you an answer. Your first night passes with snores from the next room, cats crying in the street, and rats running above your ceiling. You wake to light coming through the crack in the door, but it's not sunlight, it's a street lamp still on. The sound of church bells rings out, mixed with cries selling the morning papers. Cold creeps in through the window frame, forcing you to curl up in a wool blanket rough as sandpaper. There's a knock on the door, not a good morning, but a reminder to pack up and head to work. You sit up, feeling like your back just slept on a pile of scrap metal. The hallway fills with the scent of weak coffee, dragging in the stale smell of old tobacco. You splash cold water on your face, snapping awake instantly, along with a freezing jolt up your spine. In New York, you don't need iced coffee. Just turn on the tap and you'll wake right up. The wooden toothbrush in the corner is worn down, but at least the handle isn't broken. You promise yourself you'll buy a new one, if there's anything left after rent. The hurried footsteps in the hallway signal the whole building is already awake. You throw on your coat, slip into your worn-down shoes, and pull the door open. Your breath turns to mist the second it hits the air. The smell of fried dough from the corner shop makes your stomach growl, but you know breakfast will be cheaper and simpler than that. Around here, simple means inexpensive and just filling enough to keep working. You quicken your pace, stepping aside as a horse-drawn cart splashes dirty water onto the sidewalk. This city waits for no one, and you're learning how not to be left behind. On the main street, you see people flooding toward factories, shops, and markets. The factory bells echo all around, blending with street vendors' cries. You pull your scarf tighter, feeling like a speck of dust inside this massive machine. A man pushing a cart nearly drops a sack of flour right in front of you. You step aside and get a nod. Maybe that's the New York version of thanks. The sun rises, but its light is blocked by tall buildings. You realize that here, dawn never really reaches the streets. Still, the day has to go on. You take a deep breath. Coal smoke mixed with fried dough smells like a starting whistle. And with your first step onto the street, you officially become a part of New York 1900. In this tenement, the toilet is shared, which means whoever wakes up early wins. The tiny room has yellowed walls and a dim light bulb that looks ready to die. The water from the faucet is so cold it stings your fingers on contact. The smell of damp mold rises from old pipes, mixed with a hint of something mysterious. Every flush sends a loud roar down the hallway like an announcement. Someone just finished. If you want a real bath, you have to walk to the public bathhouse at the end of the street. There, steam rises, but not enough to muffle the neighbors chatting beside you. You rinse off while overhearing people argue about the price of potatoes. The long sink fits 4 people side by side, but no one here likes touching shoulders. A crooked mirror hangs above, blurry like it hasn't been cleaned in 10 winters. You look into it and see your face even paler than yesterday. Soap is shared, sitting in a wooden box with a note. Don't drop it on the floor. Each person takes less than 5 minutes to complete the morning ritual. Not because it's efficient, the cold pushes everyone out quickly. Newcomers take a few days to get used to brushing teeth with near-freezing water. You're no exception, but at least the cold wakes you up better than any coffee. Sometimes the faucet spits out cloudy water with a screech like metal being pulled. You learn to ignore it as long as there's still water at all. Privacy here is nearly non-existent. Every sound slips through the thin wooden walls. You know the names of people from other floors just by hearing them talk in the bathroom. Those who've been here a while know the quietest hours to sneak in some peace. You try it out and discover that's also when the water is slightly warmer. In New York 1900, a little warm water is a luxury. The price? Waking up before sunrise, when the wind still slaps your face like a knife. The public bathhouse has another feature: wet stone floors slick as ice. You grip the wall to avoid slipping in front of a crowd of strangers. The attendant at the door sells towels and reminds you not to waste time. Time is money, even when you're just taking a shower. As you step outside, the cold immediately wipes away any trace of warmth. You pull your scarf tight and head back toward the tenement. On the way, the smell of fried dough from the corner shop drifts into your nose again. Smoke from the oil stove mixes with the morning mist, making the air feel heavier. The factory bell rings in the distance, urging the whole neighborhood to move. You know you need breakfast before diving into that stream of people. But breakfast here isn't for pleasure, it's for fuel. And that fuel is usually cheap, warm, and just enough to carry your back through a long shift. You take a deep breath, preparing for the next part of your morning. This city won't wait for you to finish your meal. Everything moves faster than your brain can remember the name of the street you're on. And so you keep walking, looking for a breakfast spot before the day truly begins. The first diner you spot sits on a corner, its glass fogged up and the smell of grease leaking onto the sidewalk. Inside, the clatter of utensils on metal plates creates the morning's soundtrack. You choose a small table by the wall, its surface still sticky like it was wiped with a damp rag yesterday. The waiter brings a cup of black coffee, dark as dishwater after dinner. Steam rises, but the burnt smell from the kitchen drowns out the scent of coffee. A piece of bread is placed in front of you, so hard you suspect it once belonged to the building next door. You take a bite, your teeth ache, but your empty stomach pushes you to keep going. A thin slice of yellow butter melts quickly, leaving behind a faint, creamy, salty taste. In the corner, a man eats thick oatmeal, blowing hard to cool it between spoonfuls. The smell of oats mixed with a hint of cinnamon brings a bit of warmth to the chilly air. You order a fried egg yolk just set, edges crisped from reused oil. At the next table, 2 workers eat and talk about overtime, their voices blending with spoons tapping on glasses. You sip your coffee. The bitterness hits first, quickly replaced by the taste of something burnt. Still, the warmth from the cup helps thaw your hands. None of the food here is exactly good, but it's enough to make you feel ready for work. On a shelf by the door, a big jar of sugar has clumped. You have to knock it to get a few grains out. You sprinkle some on your bread, hoping a bit of sweetness will mask the stale taste. A newspaper boy walks in, shouting headlines while holding out his hand for loose change. His voice cuts through the diner, pulling everyone out of their private conversations. You hand him a coin and get a paper with bold letters about a fire that broke out last night. As you chew, you glance at the front page, but the faded ink makes reading feel like solving a riddle. A gust of cold wind slips through the door crack, carrying the jingle of a streetcar passing by. The waiter places an extra donut on your table, a gift for regulars, though you've just arrived. The sugar coating melts on your tongue, sweet enough to overpower the oily aftertaste. Outside, the crowd never stops moving. Life here seems to ignore clocks. You chew slower, stretching out the feeling of sitting still in warmth. The smell of cigarettes from the next table mixes with coffee and frying oil. A man in a beret walks in, shakes cold dust off his coat, and sits right next to you. He orders the same meal as you, but adds a beer, which many here drink even in the morning. You glance at the wall clock. The second hand ticks slowly, like it's trying to prolong this morning. The bread has gone cold, but you eat every crumb. Can't afford to waste even a penny. The factory bell echoes in the distance, a signal that your sit-down time is over. You stand up, leave a few coins on the table, and tighten your scarf before opening the door. The street wind hits your face, colder than when you came in. The smell of gasoline from the streetcar mixes with fish from the nearby market, waking all your senses. You merge into the crowd on the sidewalk, each step echoing with the sound of shoes on damp pavement. Ahead, smoke rises from street food carts, promising different flavors for lunch. But for now, your only task is to reach work on time. You inhale deeply, holding onto the warmth of the diner you just left. And just like that, morning in 1900s New York gives way to the grinding rhythm of labor. The clothes on your back are all you brought from home, now braving New York's weather and grime. Your thick coat has frayed edges, seams coming loose as if giving up on keeping you warm. Inside, a coarse cotton shirt once white, now yellowed from days without washing. Your buttons are misaligned, hurriedly done this morning in the dark of your tiny room. Your wool pants are stiff, with shiny knees worn from rubbing against the work desk. The leather shoes have lost their shape, soles thin enough for you to feel every stone. Inside are thick socks, patched with mismatched yarn wherever holes once were. A scarf wraps several times around your neck, not just for wind, but to hide stains on your shirt. Your beret pulled low, keeping you warm while avoiding stranger stares. The damp fabric smells musty from morning mist, releasing its scent as you adjust it. In 1900s New York, fashion for immigrants means wear everything you own at once. The rich dress to show status, you dress to survive. Your hands wear rough wool gloves, with a few fingers worn through, revealing cracked skin beneath. Wind slips through the holes, numbing your fingertips, but it's still better than bare hands. A cracked old leather belt keeps your pants in place, barely hanging on. In your inner pocket, a few coins hide the safest spot from pickpockets. As you walk, fabric rubbing against itself makes a soft swishing sound, a reminder of how long they've served you. Passing a tailor's shop window, you momentarily wish for new clothes, then quicken your pace. Fashion here is a privilege. Your clothes are simply armor against the weather. Even so, they follow you into the factory, through windy streets, and back again at the end of the day. Your coat still smells like the breakfast diner, a free layer of New York scent. The fabric darkens with each wash, mixed with dozens of others in the communal tub. Your shoes creak on the damp stone pavement, a sound as familiar as the workday bell. Your scarf is finally warming up, but it still carries the morning's dampness. Your gloves are damp with sweat and coated in dust from the streetcar railings. Other immigrants dress much like you. Rough layers on the outside, patchwork underneath. The only difference is some know how to hide the wear and tear with a confident smile. You walk briskly past hat shops, avoiding the inviting stares of salesmen. The shop windows display elegant dresses, completely foreign to your daily life. Some fur coats their cost as much as a month's wages. You clench your gloves tighter, for warmth and as a reminder not to daydream. In New York, clothing doesn't just protect you, it tells your story. And your story right now says, I work hard, I spend little and I survive. A strong wind flares your coat open, like it's testing your willpower. You pull your collar tighter and step through puddles left by last night's rain. A splash of dirty water stains your trousers, just another dark spot on already darkened cloth. You glance and move on. One more stain doesn't change anything. The streetcar bell rings, you quicken your pace to catch it. The hem of your coat brushes the ground, picking up a bit of the city's dust. And in every fiber of that fabric, New York is clinging to you, both literally and figuratively. In 1900s New York, staying healthy isn't a priority. It's a daily, silent battle. Private doctors are rarely an option unless you're rich enough to burn money like paper. Public hospitals are always packed, beds crammed close, smelling of antiseptic and sweat. People believe chicken soup and rest can cure almost anything, even the flu. Some workers still show up despite fevers, because a day off means no pay. Toothaches are a nightmare. Dentists are rare, expensive, and anesthesia barely exists. Smart folks chew peppermint or clove to dull the pain temporarily. Even small wounds are risky. Infections spread faster than you can earn treatment money. In winter, colds are nearly unavoidable. Every breath turns into white mist. In summer, disease spreads easily due to poor drinking water. Tap water may look clean, but the metallic taste makes everyone wary. Many boil their water first, if they have time and enough coal to heat it. The most common medicine is aspirin and cough syrup sold cheap at the drugstore. Herbs from the old country are still trusted by immigrants, even if doctors disapprove. Children often run through the streets in wet clothes all day, no matter the weather. Adults call it building their resistance. Persistent coughs and sniffles are just part of the season here. If you're lucky to have a relative who knows how to dress a wound, that's family health care. Some community groups set up free clinics, but there are always more patients than beds. To stay healthy, you learn to wash your hands often, even if the soap is just a slippery leftover sliver. A nutritious meal is the best medicine, but for many, it's a luxury. Fresh fruit in winter is expensive, so an orange or an apple becomes a rare treat. On damp, cold days, many people wrap scarves around their mouths to stay warm. Keeping your feet dry is a survival rule. Wet feet lead straight to lung illness. The elderly often say, "Don't let your feet go cold, and don't leave your head bare." Those simple words have saved more lives than you'd expect. Every winter you survive without ending up bedridden feels like a personal victory. Staying healthy here isn't luck. It's a survival skill. The healthy keep their jobs, earn more chances, and avoid hospital beds. And amid the city's noise, a strong breath is still proof you're hanging on. A workday in 1900s New York starts early and ends when the factory lights go out, not when you're tired. The shift whistle blasts like a military command, pulling everyone into the grind. Entering the textile mill, heat and machine oil cling to your skin. The clatter of metal is so constant, you can't even hear your own voice. Each person stands in one fixed spot, repeating the same motion thousands of times. On the line, your eyes must track every detail. One mistake can stop the machine. Lunch is usually eaten right at your station, on a wooden box or your own lap. A cold sandwich and a bottle of water are the standard fare for most workers. In the shoe factory, the smell of glue and raw leather makes newcomers choke. Dock workers face cold winds and splashes of water all day long. Bricklayers climb scaffolding without harnesses, and no one thinks twice. At Fulton Fish Market, the shouting drowns out the stench rising from wooden crates. In sewing shops, women sit in rows, their hands racing like time is money. Because it is. Mailmen trek through snow, rain, and horse-clogged streets. No days off isn't a slogan. It's just reality. Some people work 2 shifts back-to-back, switching hats and splashing water on their faces in between. Your body adjusts to the noise, the smoke, and the endless repetition. Wages are paid weekly, but most of it's already spoken for rent and food. The only time for small talk is when a machine breaks down. And even that moment ends faster than a deep breath. Those working in steel mills get used to heat strong enough to melt sweat off your body. Printers live with the smell of ink and stains that won't come off their hands. Some jobs are so dangerous that losing a finger isn't rare. But quitting is even more unthinkable than losing a finger. Newcomers burn out in the first week, but eventually they learn to endure. The pace of the job doesn't give you space to think of anything else. Every afternoon, daylight is replaced by the yellow glow of factory bulbs. The wall clock becomes everyone's enemy. Its second hand moves slower than usual. When the shift whistle finally blows, a wave of relief rushes over everyone. But for many, that's just the start of their second job. Street vendors leave the factory, swapping aprons for trays of food. Seamstresses put away their thread and head off to do laundry or sell at night markets. Dock workers finish their day only to moonlight as warehouse guards. When the sun goes down, the city stays lit, thanks to the night shift. People changing shifts move like two rivers flowing in opposite directions, never stopping. Walking home, you feel the floor rumble with every passing streetcar. Your muscles ache, but habit tells you to think only of dinner and sleep. In this city, labor isn't a choice. It's the price of staying alive. Anyone who stops too long gets thrown out of the current. And you, whether you like it or not, have become one more gear in the machine called New York. In 1900s New York, women didn't just handle the home, they were part of the labor machine. Many began their day by bringing their children to the garment factory. There was no one else to watch them. The children sat in corners, playing with fabric scraps until they were assigned chores. Some, as young as 8, could trim threads faster than adults. Their mothers stitched while teaching them how to thread a needle. Some women worked in laundries, their hands cracked from soap and cold water. At the market, they sold vegetables, fish, or bread while bargaining with one arm and holding a baby with the other. Others carried goods through the streets, their steps memorizing every pothole in the cobblestones. The work wasn't light, but their income often saved the whole family from hunger. In the evening, they still had to cook, mend clothes, and clean the tenement. In cramped rooms, the sound of children crying mixed with the hum of sewing machines. There was no such thing as a day off, just days with slightly less work. Some women earned extra by taking in laundry from small hotels. Clothes were scrubbed by hand and hung on lines stretched across shared courtyards. The wash water turned cloudy, but they kept going until the final load was done. Older children were sent to factories or shops to become apprentices. Their tasks were usually carrying goods, cleaning, or running errands. In return, they earned a few coins or maybe a meal. A lucky few got to learn reading and writing in evening classes, but most left school to work alongside their families. In winter, some children walked barefoot into factories that were warmer than the street. In summer, they endured sweltering heat inside cramped workshops. Many learned how to sell goods on the street, shout loud, walk fast, and never fear a bargain. Their small pushcarts were often the family's main income source. Immigrant women and children were often paid less than men. The reason? They're not the breadwinners, though reality said otherwise. That gap forced them to work even harder to make ends meet. Some young girls worked as waitresses or maids, earning money while picking up English. The job demanded patience and smiles, even when their feet ached. Day after day, women and children left home early and returned last. In the rain, they kept working, their wet clothes clinging to them all day. In the snow, they kept working, their hands red and cracked from cold. No one called it sacrifice, just survival routine. Every coin they earned was carefully measured before being spent. Children grew up fast. They knew the value of every cent. Many learned street names and customer habits before the alphabet. Their laughter still rang through the streets, even if their hands were covered in calluses. Women shared stories from back home, easing the ache of distance. And in this city, they clung to each other like family because they had no one else. That's how, despite being drained by work, they still found a reason to keep going. Some jobs in 1900s New York felt like flipping a coin to see if you'd survive the day. Construction workers climbed towering scaffolds without safety ropes. One slip and that was it. Dock workers lifted loads twice their weight in rain and wind on floors slick as ice. Steel mill workers labored near heat that could melt metal, surrounded by coal dust and flying sparks. Railroad repairmen had to dodge trains passing just meters away. City waste collectors didn't have it easier. The stench stuck to their bodies for days. Slaughterhouse butchers on the west side worked among blood, grease, and screaming livestock. Tugboat crews on the Hudson fought cold winds and waves taller than themselves. Chimney sweeps crawled through soot-black tunnels barely wide enough to fit. Newsboys ran through streets filled with horse-drawn carriages and streetcars, hoping not to get crushed. Some jobs seemed safe, like shining shoes, but working near the docks meant always watching your wallet. Cold storage workers had their hands go numb and their skin crack after just a few hours. Shipbuilders got used to the constant pounding of steel hammers, enough to leave you half-deaf. Beer deliverymen had to lift heavy wooden barrels and slide across foam-covered floors. Working in a matchstick factory meant inhaling phosphorus dust, enough to rot your jawbone. Road diggers often hit broken pipes, flooding whole neighborhoods with filthy water. Meat market workers switched between frozen rooms and sweltering heat, numbing their hands 1 minute and sweating the next. Coal handlers came home looking like they'd crawled out of a chimney, along with their clothes. Some jobs relied entirely on the weather, like street vendors who worked through rain and snow. Newspaper runners had to dash into fires or riots to deliver updates. Street photographers had to dodge carriages while holding bulky cameras steady. Some jobs disappeared within months, thanks to new laws or new machines. That meant losing your job overnight, no warning, no reason. Switching careers became normal, as long as you could still afford your rent. Immigrants took the risk because they had no other choice. To them, danger wasn't a deal breaker, it was just part of the job description. On a good day, you came home in one piece. On a bad one, a small accident ended everything. Still, the next day someone else would be lining up to take your spot. In New York, even a risky job was better than no job, because at least it gave you a chance to come back tomorrow if you made it. In 1900s New York, winter and summer felt like two punishments taking turns. In winter, the cold crept through every crack in the tenement walls, turning your breath to smoke, even in your sleep. Coal wasn't cheap, so families piled on more clothes even indoors. The thickest wool blanket still let wind slip through holes like fishing nets. In the morning, a thin layer of ice covered the wash basin, you had to break it before use. Outside, the wind stabbed your face like needles, making your eyes water non-stop. Outdoor workers wrapped scarves tightly, showing only bloodshot eyes. At the docks, the cold air off the Hudson froze your fingers in minutes. When snow fell, streets became slushy white mud, slick as glass. A fall didn't just hurt. It soaked your clothes and you had no spares. Summer was the opposite. Heat from tin rooftops turned rooms into ovens. With no electric fans, you hoped the window breeze was strong enough to move the curtain. Summer nights meant tossing in sweat-soaked mattresses that already smelled of mildew. In attic rooms, the heat built up so much it was hard to breathe. Streets stank of garbage, sweat, and horses. Vendors waved paper fans while yelling for customers. Children splashed in public fountains to cool down. Many slept on porches or rooftops to escape the heat inside. Doctors warned about heat stroke, but advice was cheaper than medicine and often ignored. On boiling days, clean drinking water became a luxury and often wasn't clean. Shaved ice stands popped up, but their price could match an entire meal. In factories, ceiling fans spun so slowly they were basically decoration. Workers wiped sweat constantly to keep it from dripping onto products. On streetcars, heat and body odor made it feel like you were steaming inside a pot. Some carried damp cloths, hoping for a few extra minutes of relief. When rain came, the heat turned to humidity, and dampness rose from every alley. Summer also brought swarms of flies and mosquitoes, especially near markets and docks. They landed on food, on people, and no one could keep up. Sleeping on nights like that was a challenge. Hot, itchy, and filled with buzzing sounds. Winter made you long for summer, and summer made you crave the cold. But both seasons remind you, in this place, the weather is always against you. Immigrants learned to adapt, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. In winter, you worked to stay warm. In summer, you paused more just to breathe. Clothes changed with the season, but the discomfort stayed the same. Your winter blanket became a summer sheet, still smelling of smoke and dampness. Heavy winter boots were swapped for thin canvas shoes that soaked up every drop of rain. And no matter the season, you still had to go out and earn your living. No one had the privilege to stay in just because it was too hot or too cold. This city doesn't care about your comfort, only if you can keep working. So winter or summer, you still wake up, get dressed, and step back into the grind. In a New York tenement in 1900, you were rarely truly alone. The bugs were always there. They might be bed bugs, lice, fleas, or things you didn't want to name. By day, they hid in wall cracks, under beds, or inside floorboards. At night, they came out and treated your body like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The itchy red bites woke you up, scratching until your skin bled. Bedbugs didn't care who you were, rich or poor, they bit everyone. Lice spread fast. Just standing near someone on a streetcar was enough. Newcomers were shocked, but locals just shrugged. That's normal. Boiling water was the main weapon, but heating a pot was a luxury. Some sprinkled sulfur powder around their beds, hoping the bugs hated the smell. Cockroaches the size of fingers darted through the kitchen, faster than you. In the tenements, the sound of someone slapping bugs was part of the nightly soundtrack. Laundry lines in the courtyard doubled as bug shelters. Kids treated delousing each other like an afternoon game. Women spent hours boiling scarves and wool hats to kill eggs. Still, just days later, the pests would return like they never left. Rats were frequent neighbors, chewing everything from bread to leather shoes. Some were bold enough to climb on kitchen counters while you were still standing there. Their footsteps above your ceiling sometimes made you think someone lived upstairs. Old folks joked that if you didn't see bugs or rats, it meant you were already dead. In factories, bugs crawled into your lunch if you didn't seal it tight. They thrived on the cluttered streets and endless food scraps. Anyone dreaming of perfect cleanliness quickly gave up, or gave up on the city. Even cheap hotels weren't immune. Bugs lived in train stations and theaters too. Immigrants accepted them as part of city life, because wasting energy on bugs wouldn't help pay rent. Eventually, you learned to fall asleep even while hearing them scratch the wood. Truth is, you were never truly alone here. The parasites made sure of that. Some called them the long-term residents of New York. And like you, they had no plans to leave. In 1900s New York, hope wasn't on the daily menu, survival was. You worked, ate, slept, then repeated like a gear that never stopped turning. A good day meant coming home with all your fingers still attached. A bad day meant losing your job, your belongings, or both. The future was such a luxury, people only mentioned it when joking. Dreams were often just a quiet evening and a full meal. Some only wished for an extra pair of shoes or a blanket without holes. But this city didn't care what you needed, only whether you paid the rent. Miss a payment and your door gets locked, your things tossed into the street. People learned to smile through exhaustion, because complaining changed nothing. Every coin you earn carries a cost, in sweat, blood, or a few prematurely gray hairs. Sometimes someone you know disappears, and no one asks where they went. Maybe they left the city, maybe the world. Either way, it's not so different here. Police still patrol daily, but poverty slips into every alleyway unchecked. The streetlights are bright, but the shadows remain full. You begin to believe that endurance is a skill, not a reflex. Working while sick, eating while exhausted, sleeping while hungry, it becomes your norm. Meals lack nutrition but offer just enough strength to stand through the next shift. When sick, your remedy is taking a day off, if you can afford it. At night, the clatter of streetcars and horse hooves remind you the city never sleeps. By day, the factory whistle reminds you that you're not allowed to either. Everyone who survives here long enough accepts that fatigue is a default state. Endurance is passed down like survival wisdom, from one person to the next. Some call it willpower, but most just call it no other choice. Some mornings, you wake up and can't remember what day it is, but you still put on your coat, step out, and join the moving crowd. Time flies when you're busy, and crawls when waiting for payday. Every week ends with the same question: how much longer can I take this? But the answer doesn't matter, because the next morning you go back to work. This city doesn't reward persistence, it just doesn't kill you right away. Dark humor is the only thing some people have left to laugh at by day's end. Everyone has a lucky I'm still alive story to share. And it usually starts with, that day, I was just heading to work like always. Existing here isn't living. It's staying just strong enough not to collapse. Joys are fleeting and tiny, but just enough to keep you from giving up. A warm pastry, a quiet evening, or a week without illness counts as happiness. The longer you stay, the more you realize that hope is a luxury the poor can't afford. The only thing they can spend freely is time, trading it for rent and food. Even rare days off are swallowed by laundry, mending, and prepping for the next week. When someone asks, "Are you okay?" the common reply is, "I'm still standing." This existence doesn't write fairy tales, it writes debt ledgers. And every page in that ledger is stained with sweat, street dust, and loom noise. Big dreams are compressed and stored away, waiting for a chance that might never come. But opportunity rarely knocks, unless it's while you're asleep and miss it. People don't leave New York because they're tired. They leave when there's nothing left to lose. But you still have a roof and a job, so you stay. You stay to keep enduring because it's the only way to survive. And one day, you'll realize you've become someone who can endure anything. Not because you're strong, but because you're used to it. In this city, being used to suffering is how you prove you belong. When the sun disappears behind the tall buildings, the last light fades from the narrow streets. You leave the factory, shoulders and arms heavy, but your legs still carry you home. The street becomes a chaotic symphony. Streetcars, hooves, and nighttime hawkers. The smell of coal smoke from food stalls mixes with uncollected trash. Yellow lights reflect off wet sidewalks, casting silhouettes like scenes from an old film. You push through the crowd at the night market, where vendors try for one last sale. Some of the people you saw that morning are still working, just in different jobs. Dinner back at the boarding house is simple, watery soup and slices of hard bread. While you eat, you hear arguments from the next room and a child crying. Someone tells an old story to make the meal feel less heavy. After dinner, you rinse your tin bowl in cold water and dry it with a frayed cloth. On the bed, you shake out the thin blanket, trying to push out the bedbugs. The window stays cracked open for air, even as cold wind slips in without mercy. A train whistle echoes from afar, reminding you the city is still awake. A rat darts across the corner of the room, but you don't bother chasing it. Your body aches too much to care. The oil lamp is turned low, its flickering light dancing on stained walls. You pull the blanket high, curling up as if to vanish into the cold. Outside, music drifts from a tavern, out of place in the quiet night. Laughter rises from the street, then fades under the rumble of a passing cart. Above, slow, heavy footsteps of someone arriving late echo through the ceiling. You exhale long, watching your breath fog the air in front of you. The day is over, but the tiredness stays. In the dark, you hear someone coughing long and dry through the thin wall. That cough mixes with the beat of your heart, slowing into sleep. You think about what you did today, then let it go, nothing new to remember. Every day feels the same, only the weather or the meal changes. Outside, New York glows, as if it doesn't care who's worn out. Your eyes grow heavy, but your ears still catch the fading rumble of a streetcar. In that last moment before sleep, you realize you're still breathing. And here, that already counts as a victory. Sleep isn't deep, but just enough to rest the body a little. You know tomorrow you'll wake up in the same room, to the same sounds and smells, and start a new day again, as if there was never a pause. But for now, you let yourself believe things could be different. Even if just in dreams, you leave the city to somewhere without train whistles, a place without shifts, rent, rats, or bugs. But tomorrow's morning bell will pull you back faster than any dream. You curl deeper under the blanket, trying to hold on to the last warmth of the day, and end another day in 1900s New York with one reward: you're still alive. So ends a day in early 20th century New York, from the morning whistle to the chill creeping into sleep. You survived hard bread for breakfast, a shift that felt like a century, and the company of bugs. You learned to breathe through coal smoke, eat lunch to machine noise, and sleep beside streetcar roars. The city gave you no break, but kept you too busy to worry. Here, resilience isn't a choice, it's a requirement. Every day is a test. Do you have enough strength to return tomorrow? If yes, congratulations, you officially belong to this city. If not, New York will forget you faster than you think. The streets will keep buzzing, the factory will keep smoking, and someone else will take your place. But if you're hearing this from a warm room with hot coffee on your table, then remember, you just avoided waking at 5 a.m. to line up at a public bath. You don't pay rent weekly, cook over a shared coal stove, or share blankets with bugs. Here, the American dream begins with surviving your first winter. And if you live in the present, your dream might just be strong Wi-Fi and food delivery. So, do you really want to return to 1900 where everything felt more real? Where noise never stopped, weather fought you daily, and every coin cost sweat? If your answer is yes, then congrats. You've just enrolled in the world's harshest survival program. But if it's no, then cherish your coffee machine and private bathtub today, because sometimes the romance of the past only looks beautiful from the present. And 1900s New York will still be there, waiting for those bold enough to return. Hi guys, how are you today? If you're sitting on your bed, sipping coffee and watching this video, then savor that feeling just a little longer. Because in just a few minutes, you'll be pulled back 3,000 years to a time when coffee didn't exist and beds were made of stone. Today, I'll guide you into a role, not a pharaoh, not a prophet, but a concubine. Not the main one, you're number 34 out of 97, and he barely remembers your name. You live in a golden palace, but can only step out when summoned, and must retreat when someone more important arrives. People think concubines live in luxury, but have you ever wondered, if you're chosen only for your looks and forgotten when you're not pretty enough, is that really living? Each day, you must learn to smile at people you don't trust, and stay silent even when you feel exposed. What do you think will happen if tomorrow morning, the pharaoh wakes up and decides he wants someone new? There's no warning and no apology. Everything in the palace can change, except your place on the power ladder. You may be praised today and forgotten tomorrow, but still, you must wear your makeup like it's your first day being noticed. They write poems for queens, paint goddesses on walls, but no one tells the story of concubines. Today I will, not to romanticize it, but to show you, the quietest roles are often the ones that decide who survives. If you're feeling short of breath, that's normal. Your room has no window, and the incense ran out yesterday. Above you is a stone ceiling. Beneath you is a straw mat covered in linen, more luxurious than a slave, but far beneath a sacred cat. Are you ready? If not, that's fine. No one here waits for you to adjust. But if you want to continue, just take a deep breath, like every concubine has done before opening her eyes each morning. And if you enjoy this style of storytelling, don't hesitate to follow, only if you truly want to walk with me to the end of this palace. We'll start in the room where you just woke up, where every gaze turns away except for the lice and the cat. There's no magic in this story, only perfumed oils, crushed charcoal, and smiles more rehearsed than any dance. This could be your first day, or your last, as an Egyptian concubine. You wake up with an aching back, not from a bad dream, but from the hard, damp straw mat beneath you. The scent around you is a mix of cold stone, dried sweat, and leftover oil from yesterday's ritual, a perfume with no name. The first light doesn't come from a window, there are none, but from a crack in the loft ceiling, just enough to catch dust. You pull your legs in, trying not to disturb the cat sleeping by your pillow. It's worshipped, but you're not so sure about yourself. Your hair is tangled in clumps, stuck to your forehead. You slept like someone afraid of being forgotten if you lay too still. Footsteps echo in the hallway, heels tapping on stone, each step reminding you that the only thing approaching is roll call. You sit up, not because you're ready, but because staying down won't make life any better. No one wakes you up. Everyone's too busy securing their own place on the invisible ladder to favor. Your feet are cold. The stone floor absorbs heat like the hand of death reaching out each morning. You grope for the old linen cloth hanging by the water jar, clean enough to wash your face, dirty enough to leave your skin dry and tight. One shoulder aches. Maybe you slept on a pebble last night, but you don't have the right to complain to a rock. Drums sound from outside, 3 steady beats, announcing that today will be exactly like yesterday. You get up, stepping over 3 pairs of legs, still hoping for one more minute of sleep. This room runs on other people's breath. No curtains, no privacy, just a chipped clay jar to greet you good morning if you wake up late. You glance at your belongings. The chipped jar of lip color is still there, and so is the comb with missing teeth. Every item you own is proof that you're still here, even though no one ever asked if you wanted to stay or leave. Sometimes you wonder, if you disappeared tomorrow morning, would anyone even notice? But then the cat meows softly, and somehow that feels like enough reason to get up again. A young maid passes by the door, says nothing, places a tray of cold water down, then vanishes like smoke. That's all you'll get this morning. 1 cup of water, 1 passing glance, and a few minutes to remind yourself you're still alive. You look into the water, see your blurred reflection, not because it's dirty, but because your eyes don't dare look straight for longer than 3 seconds. Once you tried looking closely and saw features fading day by day. Since then, you no longer linger. You take a deep breath, run your fingers through your hair, and wonder, what kind of smile should I wear today to be remembered? In this room where no one teaches anything, you learn how to survive by watching those who've lasted longer. Some rise early, some rise beautiful. You try to rise without breathing too loudly, so as not to disturb the air. Footsteps sweep past the hallway again, quicker this time. Someone may have been summoned. Could be you. You move toward the door, and not because you want to, but because staying would raise questions. The stone tiles under your feet are just as cold as the first time you stepped in. That feeling has never changed. You don't know how today will unfold. But one thing's certain. Last night's sleep wasn't enough to recover. A new day begins not with sunlight, but with a ritual no one ever asked if you wanted to perform. You leave the room like a shadow, except shadows have the right to stay still if they don't want to move forward. Down the corridor, other concubines are walking too, one by one, as if all heading the same way without knowing the destination. No one says a word. Everyone's busy reviewing what needs fixing, or what might make them stand out more than yesterday. You know the overseer's eyes are watching. They don't need to speak. They just note who's late, who smudged eyeliner, who yawned. You glance to the side. Concubine number 33's blush is heavy today. You're unsure if that's boldness or desperation. Footsteps echo steadily between 2 stone walls, where there's no music, only the rhythm of silent competition. A breeze sneaks in through a small vent, just enough to remind you there's blue sky outside, but not for you. The room ahead is brighter. It means you're near the place where lines are formed. You take one last breath, trying not to shiver, not out of fear, but from the cold. And then you step into that light, where a concubine's day begins not with greetings, but with a single look. In the room to the left, they call it the cleansing area, though you've never seen it truly clean. The walls still were the color of old stone. The water sits in jars, stagnant, cold, and unchanged. You remove your cloth and step toward the shared basin. Yesterday it washed a god's statue. Today it's your turn. The scent of leftover incense mixes with mildew, as if you're bathing in a forgotten dream. Your hand touches the water, cold as if stored in the pyramid's basement. You don't gasp, not because you're used to it, but because no one is allowed to complain in the morning. Someone is waiting behind you. Could be number 35 or someone with more privilege. You wipe your face, scoop water through your hair, not wet enough to be clean, but tangled enough to resist brushing. An old maid once said, "Cold water is good for the skin." She vanished 3 days later, so no one confirmed if that was true. You apply a layer of powdered stone to your face, or not to look pale, but to cover what must be hidden when light hits at an angle. Your eyes need to be redrawn. The black pigment is made from burnt ash and resin, a mixture that beautifies while stinging your eyes. You once heard that drawing eyes like the god Horus would grant protection, though no one ever said from what. Your lips are dry, so you use the leftover honey from yesterday's ritual? If you're lucky, no ants will show up. There is no mirror, only water, and water always makes you look more faded than you truly are. You dry your face with a thin cloth old, frayed, and once owned by someone who's no longer in the palace. Every motion is swift and precise, and not because you're in a hurry, but because you've done it unconsciously every day. You once hoped brushing your hair and applying perfume would bring joy, but now, the only feeling is just getting it over with. The scent on your neck is no longer fresh. It lingers from yesterday and the day before. A small red mark appears on your neck, maybe from scratching, or maybe from a loose thread in the cloth brushing you as you slept. You want to ask someone if it's visible, but stop. Everyone is too busy with their own faces. Everyone is polishing the fragile shell they hope will make them stand out. But what gets you chosen isn't makeup. It's the gaze of someone you're not allowed to look back at. You dab a bit of resin on your wrist, then hide it under your sleeve like a thin charm. Once, a concubine told you, if he doesn't notice you, at least let the scent arrive first. You didn't believe her, but you still do it today, not out of hope, but because you don't know what else to do. A maid brings a wooden box. Inside are a few combs, a pumice stone, and some oil-soaked fabric scraps. You choose the comb with the most teeth intact, brushing through hair that still holds grains of sand from a courtyard ritual 3 days ago. Each stroke of the comb makes your hair sigh, or maybe it's you sighing. You can't really tell anymore. You lift your chin, straighten your back, not to look more beautiful, but to seem less like someone who just woke up from stone. Outside, the sunlight begins to shine into the hallway, signaling it's time for someone to be summoned. Maybe it's you. You put everything back in the box, wrapping up what's called self-care in just 5 minutes. Everything is fast, everything is quiet, because everyone knows. Those who are slow are the ones whose names are forgotten. A voice calls out, not your name, but close enough. You have to go. You stand at the threshold, dress smoothed, face finished, eyes emptied of emotion. You don't know what you'll witness today, or whether someone will witness you, but you know for sure, if you show you're tired or worried, you'll become invisible to those who matter. You take a deep breath. The scent of rotting wood, faded perfume, and limestone surrounds you. The smell of power mixed with waiting. Your feet touch the stone floor for the how many th time you've lost count. But it's still as cold as the first. Faint music begins from the main hall. Steady beats like the heartbeat of a ritual in which you are just one small detail. And so you go, not to stand out, but because here, if you don't step forward, you'll be stepped over. The courtyard where breakfast is served lies between 2 stone corridors. Sunlight pours in, but never enough to feel pleasant. In front of you is a thin bronze tray, no name, no rank, and not many options either. A piece of flatbread as dry as old hope, a pale cup of honey, and a glass of water, warm and murky. They call it a meal for the chosen, though you've never known who actually chooses the menu. You reach to break the bread, and your first thought is, it won't tear. It snaps, then falls. You try dipping it in honey, but the liquid has thickened like it's been sitting since the festival 3 weeks ago. The honey sticks to your fingers, then picks up dust from your sleeve. Now it's sweet with a touch of old fabric. You look around. Everyone eats as if they know there won't be a second meal today. No one talks while eating, not out of manners, but because food is so scarce that no one wants to be distracted. Once you coughed during a meal, and ever since you've been told, be careful, don't waste it. You take a sip of water, unsure whether it's boiled, filtered, or from yesterday's temple basin. Your throat remains dry, or not due to lack of water, but because you stopped expecting anything from drinking long ago. Another concubine sits nearby, her makeup heavy, eyes unblinking. She eats slower than you. Perhaps she knows eating fast won't get you remembered any sooner. You're still learning that. A maid walks by, her footsteps trailed by incense, like a quiet form of mockery. You try to finish your meal, not out of hunger, but to keep your hands from looking idle if someone glances over. Sometimes you think, if today's the last day, I should at least eat properly. But with what? The flatbread crumbles in your hand, and honey clings beneath your nails, not enough to enjoy, not little enough to forget. You wipe your hands on the cloth covering the tray, something that may have once belonged to someone far more important. Again, you glance around, not searching for a friend, but to see who is being noticed. Concubine number 12 doesn't eat today. She just sits and stares, and you're not sure if it's strategy or a sign she's fading. But you're still eating and still being watched, so you still exist. In the morning light, the overseer's gaze sweeps across like sunlight slicing the surface of water. You pretend not to notice, but after living here long enough, you know that gaze always carries a mental checklist. A list of who smiled on cue, who ate slowly, who wore crooked makeup, who didn't bow low enough, even who broke their bread or ate it whole. You didn't think it mattered until someone disappeared. Once you asked an older concubine, "Why does breakfast make everyone so quiet?" She smiled, didn't look at you, and said, "Because it's the only time you can sit without acting." You're not sure if it was advice or a reminder that every moment is being watched. Finished, you stand up, not too quickly, not too slow, just enough to avoid standing out among 10 others heading the same way. The tray is left behind, no one looks back. Breakfast is over, and the next contest is about to begin. You leave the courtyard, your throat still carries the bland sweetness, and your heart feels as empty as the untouched bread. A thought crosses your mind. Will there be lunch today? Then you answer yourself, only if someone remembers your name. As you walk, your fingers touch your wrist, where honey still clings, as a way to remember you just existed sweetly. The honey sticks to your skin like a thin memory, easy to lose, but just enough to make you feel you're trying. A speck of dust falls onto the old tray, you see it, and wonder, maybe it was once part of a grander meal. You step past the threshold of the hallway, where the sun is now high. It's no longer early, and you're still unsure if today is a good or bad day. Your feet keep moving forward, but your mind stays behind with the tray you just let go of. That was breakfast. The meal outsiders think is the lightest part of a concubine's day. But for you, it's the easiest thing to swallow, and the hardest to forget. In the small dressing room, light filters through thin cloth, casting a blur that makes everyone look like they stepped out of a shrine painting. But you know the truth, paintings don't itch, and you're trying not to scratch your nape and ruin your hair. Today's dress is made of fine linen, so thin that standing backlit turns everything underneath into public knowledge. They say it flatters the figure, but wearing it, all you feel is cold on your stomach and itch on your back. The tight garment squeezes you into an ideal shape, not your ideal, but the one written by those who defined palace beauty. You bend down to tie the silk band at your waist, not too tight, because you need to breathe, but not too loose or you'll look like you're not trying. Your wrist glitters with bronze bracelets, but red marks still linger from yesterday. A thin strap rubs against your shoulder, reminding you your skin's been raw for days, and you still haven't been given a new dress. They say concubines have entire wardrobes, but you have 3 sets, rotating in this order. Freshly clean, nearly clean, still wearable. Today is nearly clean. You take a breath, and the familiar stale scent hits instantly: sweat, powder, and something uniquely yours. You subtly adjust your hem, a subconscious move you make every day, as if it's the only thing you can control. The back of your neck still itches, a dull sensation, not painful, but persistent like a rumor. You used to think it was your hair, but after seeing a few tiny bugs fall from your comb, you understood. A maid once whispered, "Lice are a condition, not a disease." You didn't laugh because you didn't know where to aim it. In the palace, everyone smells pleasant, but only from afar. Up close, you smell real skin, damp fabric, and tiny creatures that never give up. You don't dare scratch, because scratching is admitting. Instead, you tilt your head occasionally, as if checking your hairstyle. Sometimes you wonder, how does a place full of stone, incense, and perfume become heaven for lice and fleas? But then you remember, no one washes clothes daily, and sunlight doesn't linger long enough here to clean anything. The dress you're wearing is embroidered with lotus flowers, a symbol of purity, but your back is drenched in sweat. Once, you saw a concubine use clay powder to absorb odor in her dress. She vanished 2 days later from an allergic reaction. You still use that method, but less, just enough to not feel like you're melting in the sun. At A decorative stone necklace hangs at your neck, heavy, cool, and useless against the itch. Sometimes you forget where you are, not from daydreaming, but because this outfit is so tight that every move must be calculated. You lower your head slightly to check the back of your dress, not for modesty, but for yesterday's stain. Dress adjusted, hair brushed, smile ready, and the itch still there. You step into the hallway where sunlight lands. From afar, you resemble a living statue. But statues don't sweat, don't itch, and don't worry about fabric sticking to their thighs in the heat. With each step, you feel like you're wearing a costume, thin, beautiful, and utterly unreal. Footsteps echo behind you. Someone else has stepped out with you. They smell better, or so you think. You slow down, and not for grace, but to stop the fabric clinging to your back from slipping into view. A maid passes, holding another set of clothing. It smells better than you imagined. Probably meant for someone ranked a few spots ahead of you. You pretend not to see. Here, not seeing means not hurting. The sun in the courtyard is now harsh. You feel sweat threading through fabric like a warning. Move carefully. One sneeze at the wrong time, one bead of sweat in the wrong place, could be the only thing people remember about you today. You blink, then wonder, am I really living, or just wearing the same mask every morning? No one answers, only a new itch now blooming on the right side of your neck. You stand tall, adjust your sleeve, and turn toward the light. In that glow, at least things appear cleaner. They say beauty requires sacrifice, but they've never worn sheer linen among lice and scrutiny. You step forward not because you're ready, but because your dress is fixed, and your hands have nothing left to do. And like every day, you hope, if not chosen, then at least don't get caught scratching. You've painted your lips, lined your eyes, applied perfume. Now the only thing left to perfect is your smile. But behind that smile lies a battlefield only you know, sore teeth, swollen gums, and breath that hasn't been sweet since last month. No toothpaste, no toothbrush, only salt, ash, and sometimes leaves rumored to whiten teeth. You once tried chewing date skin. It freshened your mouth for a minute, then left a taste like old gravel. Every morning, you swish hot water, hot enough not to burn, yet not hot enough to kill anything. One day, you bit into stale bread and heard a sound like wood cracking from inside your mouth. A front tooth once wobbled for 2 weeks before you learned to smile with a tilted head to hide it. No one in the palace asks if your teeth hurt, because smiling is duty, not emotion. You once saw a concubine faint during a dance. They said it was windstroke, but you knew the blood from her mouth was real. You breathed softly, careful not to let secrets from your mouth drift too far. The mouthwash here is made of spices and scented ash. It burns your throat, but at least masks your own odor. Once, you skipped the rinse, and the look from someone nearby made you feel you'd committed a silent sin. You've learned to speak less, smile on cue, and never open your mouth unless absolutely needed. An ulcer on your lower gum has been with you for half a month. You gave it a name like a roommate. When you swallow, the faint taste of blood reminds you, don't bite down hard. Each night, you sleep on your side, careful not to let your swollen jaw press the mat. One slip, and you can't eat in the morning. No one in the palace mentions dental pain, because saying it out loud means admitting your appearance is no longer perfect. You once dreamed of someone healing you, but the only thing you received was a dried mint sprig from 3 seasons ago. You heard sorcerers can numb gums with sap, but those treated are ranked dozens above you. An old maid once secretly gave you clay mixed with root. You tried it once, then decided the pain was easier than that taste. Sometimes, when the pain eases, you feel lucky. At least you haven't lost a tooth in the middle of a ceremony. But luck is a fragile thing, and teeth don't grow back when you live in the palace. On the day you were summoned near the throne, you only hoped not to smile too long. Not out of fatigue, but fear that a tooth might fall out. They looked at you and said, "That smile is poetry." They didn't know you were clenching your hand to stop your gums from bleeding. You thought, if you could ask for one privilege, it would be silence, no speaking, no chewing, no pretending you're okay. But concubines don't have the right to choose silence. Silence means you've been replaced, not that you're resting. So you keep talking, smiling, enduring, as if your mouth weren't a battlefield. You tell yourself, tomorrow will be better, the teeth will feel better. But deep down, it's just how you stop yourself from screaming now. One last time, you look at your reflection in water, lips still pink, eyes still bright, and the pain is learned to hide just like you have. You turn away, walking on with that smile, not to charm anyone, but to look like someone still worth noticing. After enough smiling and touching up, you're taken to what they call the training room. There are no large mirrors, no instructors, just a flute, a few gestures, and a series of watchful eyes. You begin moving to the rhythm, not out of love for it, but because no one survives long if they miss a step. A maid beats the drum steadily. It's not loud, but it feels like every beat marks your mistakes inside your head. Right hand up, left foot out, every imperfect move will be remembered, even if unspoken. You once thought being a concubine meant waiting to be chosen. But waiting is only part, the rest is rehearsing without error. Some days you dance for 4 hours straight with no one watching, but you still dance, because someone might be secretly observing. Just like you eat breakfast, not to be full, but because someone is looking. You dance and not from passion, but to be remembered. Your hand aches from holding the fan too long. Your shoulders throb from staying upright, but no one asks if you need rest. You once tried to sit down from dizziness. The result was being excused from dance for 2 days, with a look colder than the Nile breeze. When not dancing, you practice speech, phrasing, tone, and silence when silence is best. One exercise: learn to listen in a way that makes others feel pleased. No one teaches it. Fail and you disappear. You were once asked to smile with your eyes. You're still unsure if you did it right, but you're still here, so maybe not entirely wrong. Another day, you were summoned for singing practice, not to sing loudly, but to make sure your voice never escapes closed walls. They say singing is to touch emotions, but here, emotions must be filtered before turning into sound. It took you a week to learn how to greet an official with your eyes, a bow, and not breathing too deeply. A month to know when to step back, when to stand still, and when to accidentally be present. A year to understand. Nothing you do is to be loved. It's to avoid being dismissed. During a break, you look at your hands, fingers slightly swollen from overdancing, nails chipped at the corners. You see number 41 practicing poetry. She said one word wrong and had to relearn the entire piece. No one comforts, no one helps. Everyone carries their lesson like a rock tucked in their robe, heavy, but not to be dropped. Once you saw someone break into tears. No one scolded her, but the next day she was reassigned to teach dance to junior girls. She never returned, so you learned not to cry, or not because you're strong, but because the watchful eyes might see too much. You learn to remember the names of gods, the habits of superiors, even the rhythm of the tiles beneath your feet. None of it gives you freedom. It only helps you survive a little longer among others learning the same. One day, you read mythology not for curiosity, but because someone said, Pharaoh favors those who understand culture. You're not sure if it's true, but here, every rumor is worth studying. Sometimes that's all it takes to be kept. You can't remember the last time you sat still, not practicing, not performing, not correcting, just being. And then you ask, do I even have a self, or just a version built from endless rehearsals? Some say to live is to do what you love. But here, to live is to do what's asked, and do it flawlessly. You leave the training room at noon. Sweat clings to your neck. Powder beneath your eyes starts to smear. You don't have a towel, just the wind and glances that pass by, then turn away. On your way back, you pass a concubine being escorted to meet a guest. She says nothing, just grips her hands tightly. You bow your head without words, because in the palace, any word can become wrong if said at the wrong moment. Once again, you walk the long hallway, where light isn't bright enough, yet still hurts your eyes. You're tired, your mouth is dry, and you're hungry, but you don't stop, because no one's allowed to stop. The work doesn't end with a bell or thanks. It simply pauses until another summons arrives. You no longer feel resentment. You feel used to it. as if this is the real shape of those who want to live longer. Each day you get better, not at dancing or singing or speaking, but at existing without letting anyone see you're tired. And you understand, in the palace, whoever can keep performing, that's who still gets to stand. As you walk past the West Corridor, where few people go, you hear laughter, small, brief, and afraid to echo. A group of children are learning to dance, tiny steps repeated over and over, as if someone is teaching them to survive before they even know what living means. Girls aged 8 or 9, thin, pale, dark-eyed from lack of sleep, still trying to smile to the music. One girl falls while turning. No one helps. She gets up immediately, dusts nothing off, sheds no tears. You were once one of them, a tiny shadow trained to smile before your baby teeth fully grew in. In the palace, girls are taught obedience before they learn to write, and silence before learning to breathe deeply. An old woman sits by the door, hair silver, eyes cloudy, still stitching a cloth no one ordered. They say she was once a concubine. Now she's just someone too old to be remembered by name. No one asks if she had children, if she dreams, or if she wants to leave that room. She sits there every day, watching the children dance, then returns to her sewing, as if trying to stitch herself back together. You once thought that if you lived long enough, you'd get to do something besides perform. But looking at her, you understand. Sometimes living longer only means witnessing more. Not every woman in the palace is chosen, but all are forced to wait. The chosen worry about being replaced. The unchosen worry about being forgotten. Some do hair, write poems, bake bread, stay silent, but no one truly gets to be themselves. A pregnant concubine is led across the courtyard. She holds her belly, eyes avoiding everyone. In the palace, giving birth isn't a celebration. It's a test. If it's a boy, you might stay. If it's a girl, no one knows yet. Someone once whispered, if she's born a girl, teach her to smile before she learns to run. You once asked, has anyone ever left here? The answer was yes, but no one remembers their names. Older women fade into corners, where light doesn't reach, and memories are no longer repeated. Some sew, some teach dancing, some simply wait for the day their names stop being called. In the laundry area, a 10-year-old girl wrings cloth with small, stiff hands. No one helps. You see yourself in her, same height, same way of biting her lip when afraid of making mistakes. You want to ask her name, but remember, no one asks names here without a reason. An older concubine walks by, her posture straight but her gaze hollow, as if emptied years ago. Once you heard her say, when I was young, I longed to see the pharaoh. Now I just hope not to be seen. Another girl sits curled in the courtyard, messy hair, eyes closed, maybe meditating, waiting, or trying to disappear. In the palace, women are a collective sigh, long, steady, and never heard. You pass by a row of rooms. One once belonged to a concubine who died of fever. Now it stores old belongings. Each item was once part of someone, but now no one remembers whose. Sometimes you wonder, if you disappeared, who would notice first, your dresser or the cleaner? In the palace, you are a puzzle piece fitting somewhere, but easily replaced by any piece the same shape. A group of girls are learning speech, voices high, round, and forced like wind shaped into words. You pause for a moment, then turn away. Here, standing too long can be mistaken for daydreaming. Each girl will grow into a version of the woman you're trying to become. And you are just a version of someone who once walked these halls and is now never mentioned. All of them form a long chain, no names, no endings, no part different enough to be its own story. In the palace, no one is born to become someone. They are only taught not to disappear too quickly. They say if you're not pretty enough to be a concubine, you can learn to perfume the dead. You're unsure if that's comfort or cruelty, but once you're in that group, there's no returning to the main courtyard. Someone brews the wine used in rituals. Its scent drifts across the hall, but they're not allowed a single sip. Someone else is in charge of wiping the statues, a task never spoken aloud, but done precisely every single day. There's a group dedicated to scrubbing the stone floors after rituals. Sometimes it's animal blood, sometimes it's unclear. You once saw them crouching to clean, bare hands, gray rags, no one lifting their head even when others walked by. They're not allowed to touch offerings, not allowed to speak to concubines, not allowed to look directly at the statues, but they hear everything: idle talk, whispered names, and the sound of fear. One maid collects wilted flowers from altars. That fading scent clings to her like a perfume of sorrow. You once asked a kitchen worker, "Is it hot in there?" She smiled and said, "Hotter than the stone courtyard at noon." There's someone who prepares ritual porridge, not for eating, just for offering, then discarding. You didn't understand why food was wasted until someone said, "That portion belongs to the gods. No living soul may touch it." An old woman walks with a crutch. She used to carry water from the Nile to the temple for 50 years. Not once did she rest. When she slipped on a stair, they moved her to the awaiting orders group, a place with no work, no name. Every job in the palace is a gamble. None are truly safe, only some are less visible. You once saw a ritual cleaner in a brown robe, forbidden to cross the red stone line. Yet their eyes always knew who was beyond it. In the kitchen, a girl mixed up spices. 3 days later, she was gone. No one asked. Someone broke a ritual bowl, sent to the inner shrine to assist. No one knows if it was an honor or punishment. Here, mistakes don't need to be written down. They only need to be remembered. And to be remembered is to be removed from all future lines. Someone once said, "Working in the palace is like walking on hot sand. If you stand still, you'll burn. If you run, you'll draw attention." So everyone walks evenly, just fast enough, just quiet enough, just invisible enough not to be called at the wrong time. You look at them, the ones no one praises, no one chooses, and realize, maybe they are the freest people in the palace, because they don't have to look beautiful, don't have to smile, don't have to shine. They just have to keep living in the palace's shadows. In the palace, time isn't measured by holidays or performances, but by the temperature of the stone floor each morning. When it's cold, the tiles exhale a silent chill, not enough to be wind, but enough to creep into your ankles like a warning. You once thought you lived in golden sunlight, but within stone walls, light only proves the sky still exists. Egypt's winters are short, but when they arrive, the cold seeps into your bones before you can find another layer of cloth. Your dress is still as thin as it was in summer, except now, your sweat no longer drips out, but draws inward. At night, you curl beside an empty water jar, not for warmth, but because it's the only place that still holds traces of human heat. A concubine once told you she sleeps with her hands tucked between her thighs to warm her palms. You laughed, then tried it too. No one hands out blankets. No one asks if anyone is cold. In the palace, cold is personal, like toothaches or being forgotten. One morning, you coughed softly. By noon, you were given the day off from dance. You knew it wasn't kindness. It was a sign. Then the cold season leaves, and heat arrives like an impolite god. No knock, no mercy. The air thickens, like each molecule just walked through a smoke-filled ritual and hasn't dissolved yet. The stone under your feet is no longer cold. It burns like a cat's tongue licking your soles through thin sandals. You walk slowly, not out of exhaustion, but to keep your linen dress from sticking to your skin. Every step a negotiation with the heat. Long corridors, low ceilings, and no doors to the outside. The air moves like water trapped inside a sealed jar. Each time you yawn, a wave of hot air escapes and makes you wonder, is your body itself now resisting? Sweat doesn't drip. It evaporates instantly, leaving a salty film and a warm scent around your collar. A maid near you, eyes red from incense, wrists drenched, still says, "Today is cooler than yesterday." You nod, not in agreement, but because you're too tired to argue with someone also melting. You once thought, maybe I'll get used to this. But after 5 years, the only thing you've mastered is hiding sweat behind a smile. On festival days, you wear an extra layer of costume, embroidered cloth, gemstone trims, 3-tiered necklaces, under a 42 degrees Celsius sun. Someone once fainted mid-bow. No one caught her. Only her fingers brushed the ground. like apologizing for collapsing at the wrong time. You learn to breathe through your nose, slow and steady, so your lipstick stays in place and no one hears your panting. Each time you stand near the incense burner, you feel like you're being steamed from the inside, like an offering item. One day the sky turned gray, you rejoiced, but the ceiling still held yesterday's heat, and sweat pooled at your nape. On summer nights, the floor stays warm like a cat's belly, except the cat is worshipped, and you are only left alone if forgotten. You dare not complain about the heat, because heat means weakness. Weakness means falling behind, and falling behind is the first step to being replaced. So you say, "What a lovely day," then sit on a stone slab hot enough to fry bread, pretending it's a velvet chair. In the resting room, everyone shares the same scent, the smell of those who live in stone. Eat little, drink little, breathe less. A girl sits near you, back soaked, hair matted, yet she holds her head high, eyeliner intact. You don't know her name, but you remember her eyes, the kind that say, "I can still endure this." In the palace, those who can still endure are those who still get to stand. Those who endure better get to stand closer to the center. And those who can no longer endure are moved to the support group or for offering if the timing is unfortunate. You once thought summer would be easier, no cold, but you realized nothing is easier, only different ways of sweating. In the heat, your smile dries like cracked earth, holding shape, but no longer alive. You begin to dream of breezes, not from meadows, but door cracks, dark corners, anywhere no one is watching. But in the palace, doors never open, and even shadows are already occupied. So you stand in the light, sweaty, sore, itchy, but still beautiful. Each drop of sweat rolling down your chin is unseen effort, silently acknowledged. In this heat, you don't wish for love, just for someone to let you sit down without judgment. But no one allows it, because in the palace, whether it's cold or hot, you must still stand straight, breathe lightly, and smile as if you are the wind. In the Egyptian palace, you're rarely truly alone, even when everyone else has left, because there are tiny creatures clinging to your seams, living in your stitching, and sometimes crawling across your back while you sleep. They're called the unnamed things, because saying their names is bad luck, yet not saying them doesn't stop the biting. You once woke in the middle of the night, not from dreams, but because your nape itched, a kind of itch that feels like something just arrived and stayed. You didn't scream. Any sound at the wrong time is seen as weakness. Instead, you scratched lightly, then stayed still, accepting this as the only roommate who isn't competing with you. The next morning, you look into a water tray and see a faint red mark behind your ear. You ask no one, apply nothing. Another concubine once joked, "Lice prove your hair is thick enough for poetry." You laughed, then scratched. In the palace, everyone smells nice, but fragrance doesn't kill eggs. It only makes them live more luxuriously. You were once given a herbal ointment for your hair, used it 3 times, then got warned about wasting the treasury. Once you saw a bug crawl across your pillow. It stopped right in the middle of a Horus symbol, as if asking for respect. You raised your hand to swat, then hesitated. The blood inside might be yours, or from whoever used the blanket before you. People say, "Don't worry, they won't kill you." But you know, they kill your sleep 1 hour at a time. One concubine got so used to them, she always carried a wooden comb for silent conversations with the scalp. You asked to borrow it. She said, "No, everyone must keep their own itch secret." You fix yourself, not to be beautiful, but because if you don't fill that gap, someone else will. In the palace, there's no reward for endurance, but those who endure better live longer. You used to think, maybe if I tried harder, I'd be noticed someday. Now you just think, as long as they don't call my name the wrong way, the way you walk, the way you sit, the way you nod, everything has been adjusted until nothing feels like yours anymore. You're no longer ashamed to stand among people better than you, because you no longer feel much at all. One day, you smiled at a cat walking down the hallway. It looked up and walked away. You envied it, could walk away, but you had to stay because you were taught patience is a noble trait. A new girl entered, young, beautiful, radiant. She passed by and asked, "Is it fun here?" You said, "Yes." You weren't lying. When you no longer have expectations, everything becomes easier to accept. Every evening, you rest your hand on your forehead, staring at the stone ceiling, wondering, if I disappeared, how long until someone replaced me? A roommate of yours once left. No one mentioned her again, and her bed was filled that very night. You didn't cry, because if you cry, who will wipe your tears? And if someone does, will they remember why? You learn something. To survive the palace, you don't need to believe in the future. You just need enough calm to get through today. Some days you smile all day, no one asks why. Some days you're silent, no one wonders. You're no longer a person. You're software, programmed by rituals, schedules, and reflexive, "Yes, Your Majesty." They say, women in the palace are protected. But you know, not being touched doesn't mean being loved. You once saw a concubine say the wrong thing. She wasn't scolded, but from that day she disappeared from every list. Since then, you learned to speak less, then even less, then barely at all. You began to measure your worth by whether you were praised or at least not forgotten today. Sometimes that's enough. A maid once asked, "Are you sad?" You replied, "No," and honestly, you weren't sure that feeling existed anymore. You eat, work, sleep, and repeat, no different from the statues around the temple. But statues don't get hungry. Statues don't itch. Statues don't ask, "Am I still alive?" But you do, though those questions grow shorter and the answers grow quieter. Someone once said, "If you stop feeling, you stop hurting." You found that only half true, because you no longer feel pain. But whatever replaced it, you can't name. You walk slower now, not from exhaustion, but because there's no reason to hurry. Each step is like a marker of your presence. No praise, no objection, but still worth noting. No one sings in the palace. No one tells stories, and no one talks about those who left. Silence grows thicker, like fog. Not sharp, but seeping into your neck, shoulders, and mind. Sometimes you hear your own breath, and you think, at least I still make a sound. The palace is still lit. The schedule is still steady. You're still here, eating, brushing your hair, bowing, smiling. But somewhere in your mind, something has stepped back. Not dead, but no longer moving forward. Each day you repeat a silent song, no audience, no finale. Outsiders might say, "Life here must be blissful." You nod, then turn away. In your heart, there's no hope, only routine. And that routine is what's kept you standing in this palace longer than most. No one rewards endurance, but if you endure long enough, you become part of the stone walls. Unshaken, untouched, and no longer needing anything. You understand. Surviving the palace isn't about rising up. It's about not disappearing into silence. And as long as someone calls your name in the morning, you'll keep walking, no dreams, no complaints, no expectations. When the last light withdraws from the hallway, you know, you've survived another day. No one announces it, no one claps, but you still acknowledge it with footsteps heavier back to your bed. The wind slips through the cracks in the wall, not strong enough to cool you, but enough to chill your neck. The stone floor stays damp. Even on hot days, it always keeps the moisture from old ceremonies. You remove your necklace. Each tiny jingle sounds like a farewell to a role just played. The thin rope comes off, not to free you, but to prepare for a sleeping position that avoids too much contact with the floor. You lie on your side, back to the wall, like every night. No one tells you how to face, but everyone sleeps the same way. A concubine in the corner sneezes. No one checks on her. Everyone here is too busy holding their position. A cat meows faintly in the courtyard. It sounds so real, you almost believe it called your name. You close your eyes, not because you're sleepy, but because they started to sting back in the practice room. The left side of your cheek touches the straw mat, dry, rough, but at least it's still yours. Each breath reminds you, you're not dead, but whether this is living, you're not so sure. You don't dream. It's been ages since sleep showed you anything, just darkness, and then morning. A girl next to you shifts in her sleep. Her back stays straight, even in dreams. Her spine spine remembers palace posture. You hear light footsteps in the corridor, a maid doing her rounds, or someone being summoned. No one in the room asks. Asking is a sign that someone still has hope. You pull part of your robe over your arm. It's not warmer, but it makes you feel like you're taking care of yourself. A small light on the ceiling, moonlight piercing a hole, landing squarely on your palm. You turn your hand over, as if holding the light means holding on to something that's still yours. Footsteps fade. The final wooden door clicks shut. The day officially ends. No one calls for you. No one waits for you. And you never really waited for anyone either. You whisper your name in your mind. No one hears it. No one repeats it. But you want it to stay inside your memory. Your name used to be etched into a serving tray. Now it's just a faint mark at the bottom of the bronze. You used to be chosen to sing during rituals. Then you weren't. You didn't ask why. Here, there is no reason. Only replacement. You pull your legs in and curl up like every night, the safest shape to avoid bumping or being bumped. A light breeze moves. Sand sifts through the cracks, falling beside your pillow. No one sweeps it. Sand belongs here like you. Someone sighs. You don't know who. Could be you or maybe a dream fading out. You open your eyes one last time. Not to see, just to check if your eyelids still respond. Then you close them again. Breathe slowly and let your body sink into that nameless, quiet peace. No one promises tomorrow will be better, but you also don't wish it worse. In that moment, you understand. You don't need love or to be chosen, you just need to wake up. Not to live a concubine's life, just to see your name still on the morning roll call. You sleep, not for dreams, but because it's the last thing today you can do without pretending. The stone floor grows colder beneath you. The room stills further. Time slides by like an uninvited guest. On the wall, the deity in the painting smiles faintly. You smile back, though no one sees. A day ends. No sadness, no joy, nothing special. But still, a day survived. And for you, that's enough. Not out of gratitude, but because you've stopped expecting more. You sleep, hands still placed where the moonlight shines, like a final reminder, I'm still here. And in the ancient palace of Egypt, the night begins again as it has for millennia. Quietly, coldly, and no name spoken unless necessary. If you're still awake after 480 lines, welcome to the backstage of an ancient dream. A place where all statues are flawless, and everyone living beside them stays silent to fit the frame. You've seen the room, the mat, the falling moonlight, and a body long used to being invisible. Not a goddess, not a destined lover, just a name in line on a list. No prince ever wanders into the palace. No one mistakes you for the queen, and there's no magic. You won't rewrite history. You won't die tragically by a golden river. You'll simply fade with time. The stone tablets once etched with your name were worn away centuries ago. But the dinner token still gets scanned daily. No one tells your story in films, but you might show up blurry in a CGI frame beneath Cleopatra's feet. And if you think modern life is stressful, at least you have shoes, a name card, and a private toilet. Here you can be pretty, but you can't be yourself. You're made up not to look good, but to look identical. You're selected not for your qualities, but for your measurements and silence. Every step aligns with rhythm, not of music, but of unspoken orders from the entire palace. So, if you could choose again, would you want to live in an Egyptian palace? Not to change history, just to feel grains of sand slip past your robe in a suffocating long night. Maybe you'd say yes. Maybe you'd want a taste of glory for just a day. Or maybe you're just tired of utility bills and forgot the value of uneventful peace. Either way, thank you for living through a full day with us as concubine number 34. If you still think life today isn't so bad, soft beds, hot water, and TikTok, leave us a like. And if you still want to go back to ancient Egypt for that royal experience, no worries. We've got a few spots left. Ha ha ha. Hi guys. Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, back in the day, people probably didn't feel as pressured about their looks as we do now, right? Well, that's wrong. Completely wrong. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty standards weren't gentle at all, they were pure torture. They didn't have Instagram, but they had beauty standards that, if you tried to follow them, would wear you down day by day, both literally and figuratively. They didn't use photo editing apps, but they used lead-based makeup to whiten their skin, a method that was, well, a slow death. Every noble portrait was basically photoshopped by hand. Your face painted as if you were quietly dying. Every standard came with its share of pain, of hunger, and the pretense that all of it was sophistication. You sure you want to be beautiful medieval style? When having a high forehead meant plucking out every last strand of your bangs with tweezers. If this already feels a bit wrong to you, hit like and subscribe, because the next beauty standards will freak you out even more. Now, come with me back to a world where beauty wasn't in the eye of the beholder, it was in the hands tightening the corset strings. And you'll see, sometimes being naturally ugly was a privilege people back then were never allowed to have. They called it elegance, nobility, uniqueness. But in truth, it was just a way of accepting pain selectively. Back then, beauty didn't come from liveliness. It came from how much you could resemble a wax figure. The more lifeless you looked, the more admired you were. The paler you were, the less emotion you showed, the more people called you refined. If you were healthy, suntanned, with messy hair and slightly crooked teeth, sorry, you were a peasant. And peasants had no right to be beautiful, even if you were born with the face of an angel. Because beauty, in those days, wasn't defined for people, it was defined for status. And to have status, you had to leave your comfort behind entirely. In many cases, beauty standards were no different from tiny laws, except more obsessive, more persistent. Laws not written in books, but etched in the eyes of others, in the banquet hall, in the wedding, and in the mirror. A mirror that didn't reflect the truth, but reflected what you had to become, whether you liked it or not. Just like today, a sun-kissed face in the mirror might tell others you've just come back from vacation, even if all you did was work the fields. But in the Middle Ages, it was proof you belonged to the class that had to work under the sun, which is why the ideal skin was so pale, it looked almost anemic. The paler you were, the higher your status. The more bluish you looked, the more respect you got. No one cared if you were healthy, so long as your skin never saw the sun and your hands had no calluses. Want to be pale? Easy. Don't go outside, don't eat too much, and make sure to close the door when you breathe. No one called it deprivation. They called it refinement. And if you fainted from hunger, that was actually a plus, so long as you collapsed gracefully. Why was skin like printer paper so celebrated? Because it proved you didn't have to do anything at all. You just had to exist, like a living ornament. Some noble women starved themselves until their chests lost all shape, and that was considered the perfect standard. They weren't trying to shine, they were trying to disappear. While peasants were sunburnt from the wind in the fields, nobles wore white powder so thick it clung to them like the dust on a mummy. But that beauty didn't come from nature. It came from restraint, from hunger, and from the belief that the fewer colors you had, the fewer judgments you'd face. The beautiful weren't the happy ones. They were the ones who looked ready to be laid out on an altar. You might not believe it, but there was a time when people smeared pigeon's blood just to get some color in their cheeks. Others drank watered-down vinegar, not only to whiten their skin, but also to dull the feeling of hunger. And when someone asked how they lived, the answer was often, live lightly so you don't weigh down your own face. It was a way of life where even a spark of joy could be seen as vulgar. If you enjoyed your meal too much, you could be considered improper, because beauty had to be hungry and cold and absolutely silent. They didn't look at you as a person, but as a plaster statue, one that could glide slowly through a grand hall. And if a bit of mud ever touched the hem of your gown, my condolences. You just tarnished the refinement of your entire bloodline. A single sunburn, no matter how small, could cost you a marriage that had been arranged for years. A marriage where beauty determined your value as if you were an item in a silent auction. From childhood, girls were taught to guard their skin tone as if it were their life. No sun, no loud laughter, no stretching your arms, because all of that might flush your cheeks, and that was crude. They didn't want you to shine. They wanted you to fade, to blur, to dissolve like a whiff of perfume. that wasn't even real. In the diary of a young woman from that era, there's a line, "Today, my mother punished me for having eyes that were too alive. Today, you can stand before a mirror and adjust the lighting." Back then, light was the enemy because it revealed that you still had life in you. You didn't need heavy makeup. You only needed to vanish from the colors of the living world. And when someone praised you for being white as porcelain, they didn't realize porcelain is fragile and mostly kept locked away behind glass. Back then, beauty wasn't meant to be lived in, it was meant to be looked at in silence. You couldn't get dirty. You couldn't breathe too heavily. You couldn't even have the basic needs of a human being. If you feel suffocated just hearing this, congratulations, you're still normal. But if you think, well, that doesn't sound so bad, try fasting for 5 days and then attending a party in a waist-crushing gown. Or, easier still, go a week without smiling and then tell me you still feel natural. And that was only the beginning of beautiful skin in the Middle Ages. The bad news? It gets worse. If you thought the skin was torture, try putting yourself in the waistline of a 14th century lady. And I don't mean figuratively. I mean literally, inside a corset of rough cloth or stiff leather, laced until you could no longer hear your own stomach growl. Medieval beauty had no body positivity. It had the smaller, the better, and the harder to breathe, the higher the value. The ideal waist, not 56 centimeters. It was whatever number kept you from bending over to tie your own shoes. Some women even had to brace their hands on their hips just to sit down, because if they bent too far forward, their ribs might break. But you still had to smile, of course. A strained smile between two stomach spasms from lack of oxygen. And if you carelessly took one extra spoonful of porridge, sorry, you'd be paying for it with a night spent sleeping upright. A swollen belly under a corset was never called full. It was a flaw, a design error, a sign you were losing control of yourself. The irony was that corsets weren't made to protect. They were made to prove you didn't need to move. A woman who walked slowly, breathed shallowly, spoke softly, and never bowed her head, that was the beauty ideal. Not because she was refined, but because she no longer had enough air to do anything else. Today, people call that figure delicate or fragile. Back then, it was a prerequisite, proof you belonged to a class that didn't have to work. And if you had muscle, sorry, you were a laborer. Beauty was never allowed to be strong. A waist too honest would betray you, showing you had been hauling water, stoking fires, and sweeping courtyards. That's why beauty had to be hidden beneath layers of thick, tight fabric, never loosened in front of anyone. Some young women learned to eat so slowly that breakfast could last an entire hour. Not out of elegance, but because eating too quickly might make them faint. And no one was surprised if you collapsed at a party. As long as you did it gently and in a beautiful pose. The more you squeezed your waist, the more people believed you had discipline. The more you held your breath, the more they thought you were virtuous. No one asked how you felt. They only checked whether the laces were tight enough. And if they loosened just a little, the looks would change. No longer admiration, but suspicion. You weren't judged by the sound of your voice, but by the faint creak of your corset when you tried to turn. Some ladies were so skilled they could faint onto a stone floor without wrinkling their dress. They were taught that as a life skill, and they called it virtue. Today, if someone tightened your waist so much you couldn't laugh, you'd call it abuse. Back then, it was a wedding gift. A corset, beautiful and suffocating, like a gilded trap you climbed into every morning. And if you asked, what did they endure it for? The answer was simple. They endured it to be considered valuable. A small waist could buy you a good marriage, a kinder gaze, or even a proper meal. They didn't live to love themselves. They lived to be chosen. And to be chosen, you had to look as though you had no internal organs. You didn't need strength. You only needed curves and silence. Maybe that's why so few women back then lived long, because they were never allowed to breathe for long enough. But their legacy lives on. In wedding photos, in tight bridal gowns, in toxic compliments. Oh, such a tiny waist, just like the old days, they say, not knowing that in the old days, the air smelled of disinfectant and perfume masking the scent of bruised flesh. So, Are you sure you still want to be beautiful like the Middle Ages? Or are you just tightening yourself into a dream borrowed from someone else? Because in those days, beauty often began with hair, and beautiful hair was not just a sign of appearance, but a symbol of purity in the strangest way possible. Long, shiny, smooth hair meant you had virtue, even if you were secretly running a fever from scalp fungus. The problem was, no shampoo, no clean water, and no place to sit and comb your hair without picking up ash from the hearth. So how did they get beautiful hair? They used animal fat, egg whites, and cooled ash as a natural mask. Then they'd sit in front of a mirror or a piece of dull bronze and pray their hair wouldn't smell on a big holiday. Nice-smelling hair was hair sprayed with dry perfume. And dry perfume was the polite term for sulfur powder mixed with herbs. Tangled hair was combed with a broken wooden comb. If it couldn't be dead-angled, it was cut off, hidden, then cried over. Because if anyone saw you with short hair, you'd be seen as rebellious. Or worse, as a prostitute. A respectable woman had to keep her hair long, even if it was crawling with lice eggs. And it couldn't be shown in public, because hair was erotic. Seeing another woman's hair was considered a kind of moral fall. That's why they wore veils, hoods, and head coverings not for the weather, but for morality. If you ever saw a lady of that time scratching her head in the street, remember, that wasn't rudeness, it was survival. One stray louse could cause a fever lasting 3 days, and one damaged lock of hair could cost you a marriage. Some mothers even taught their daughters to rub flax oil mixed with salt into the scalp, because beauty must suffer, and suffer they did, because if you mixed it wrong, you'd get a mild burn all around your forehead, and that mark would stay for years, while the beauty standard remained unchanged. Hair must be shiny, thick, and obedient. No split ends, no frizz, no straw-like texture even if you slept on straw every night. Today, you might call hair a natural crown. Back then, hair was proof you still deserved respect. If your hair was thin, people thought you were sick. If it was curly, they thought you were wild. And if you were bald, my condolences, you'd better marry quickly before anyone found out. Without hair dryers, they dried their hair in the wind. If it rained, you kept it wet all day. And if you caught a cold from that, no problem, as long as your hair was dry in time for Sunday Mass. Some people would even boil herbs, steam their heads, then wrap themselves up like dumplings. Also, their hair could develop a noble aroma. That aroma was a blend of vetiver grass, apple cider vinegar, and a hint of leftover sulfur from the last anti-lice treatment. But as long as no one pinched their nose while passing by, you were fine. A true lady was someone whose hair could blow in the wind without anyone thinking it was a chemical accident. And if you were a servant, please avoid the wind. Your hair might blow, but no one would think it beautiful. Beauty was tied to class. So was hair. The same lice infestation, but if you were a noble, people called it unavoidable. If you were poor, they called you filthy, even if both of you bathed in the same public bathhouse. Injustice lived in every strand of hair, and the harder you tried to perfect it, the more you had to face the truth. No one actually had perfect hair, unless you painted it on a wall with expensive pigments and called it a portrait of the beauty of the age. An ideal head of hair may never have existed, but the torment over it was real and lasted for centuries. You want beautiful hair? Give up running around. And if necessary, give up your scalp too. Because beauty standards don't wait for you to be healthy. They only demand that you have enough patience to suffer in silence. Hair that had been tortured but was still called feminine. Perhaps because pain was an inseparable part of that definition. Today you go for a hair spa once a month. Back then they steamed themselves, not to repair damage, but to survive through a banquet where people would only remember your hair, not what you said. And no matter how smart, funny, or kind you were, if your hair was ruined, you'd still be left behind. Because beauty back then wasn't meant to be loved. It was meant to be looked at and silently judged. Today, a smile might earn you points in someone's eyes. But in the Middle Ages, a smile could get you removed from the marriage list. But no, the sad truth is, they didn't have to endure anything at all. The ideal man of the time didn't need muscles, didn't need charm, didn't even need to smell good. They only needed one thing: to look so idle that they could get fat without even trying. The bigger the belly, the rounder the face, the paler the skin, the stronger the proof you didn't belong in the rice fields. And if your hands had no calluses, you could give a little wave to the Duchess without being judged. If your skin was tanned, your back straight, and your teeth healthy, sorry, you looked like a mercenary, not a nobleman. They didn't like muscular men. They liked men like dough, soft, unresisting, and smelling faintly of power. The ideal model. Sitting all day without getting tired, eating all day without your robe strings getting in the way. Beer belly without the beer, extra flesh without the sweat. That was the pinnacle. If a woman had to squeeze herself into a corset to look slim, a man could throw on a wide robe to hide every contour. Not for modesty, but so they could avoid exercise while still being called composed. They didn't have to tighten anything. Just walk slowly, speak softly, and eat in the style of, "I'm not hungry, but I eat because I can." A 3-hour meal, grease on the lips, wine in the beard, and everyone called it manly. While a woman taking one bite of cake was judged, a man could devour the whole table and be praised as a connoisseur. No one told them to cover their armpits. No one required them to cinch their waist. No one was shocked if they snored at a banquet. In fact, the more carefree they were, the higher their status seemed, because only the powerful could afford not to care what others thought. They didn't have to maintain an image. They were the image. A plump gentleman, oily face, garlic breath, could still marry a beautiful wife, as long as he owned land. And don't forget, the double standard was such that his wife had to smell good to mask his smell. Some families were rich enough to hire people to fan them, not for cooling, but to blow away the husband's odor. And women had to pretend they didn't notice, while men pretended they never smelled at all. A man's scent wasn't criticized. It was called natural. A woman's scent? Lack of self-control. Men weren't taught how to live clean. They were taught how to live without asking permission. That girl tightened her corset until her chest turned purple to get married. That man? He just had to open his purse at the right moment. Love doesn't need appearances, they said, but really they only said that when they were the man. In paintings, gentlemen often wore big hats, loose robes, and sat with legs wide open, not for comfort, but because they didn't have to sit closed. Their ease was privilege. A round belly could open diplomatic doors. A double chin could be painted as a face full of benevolence. And a lifetime of laziness could be called a contemplative demeanor if your rings were big enough. So why did women have to flatten their stomachs, shave their feet, rouge their cheeks, brush their teeth with charcoal, and wear shoes barely big enough to stand in, but not walk? Because that society didn't need handsome men. It needed wealthy men. And women had to be beautiful enough to get noticed by them. No one demanded that male icons of the time have abs. But women had to have porcelain skin, velvet hair, and a silk-soft heart. There were girls of 16 married off to men of 60 simply because he speaks so eloquently. No one asked, "Do you love each other?" They only asked, "How many plots of land do you own?" And when a wife fainted from her corset, the husband would call the servant, instead of loosening the laces. That was medieval love. One sat doing nothing, the other sat perfectly still. One expanded his body, the other shrank hers until she almost disappeared. And they said, love back then was purer, maybe because no one had enough breath left to argue. And you? Where do you think true love begins? With a look? Or with the name on the land deed? However it began, it usually ended the same. Both lying in the same dark, damp room, being bitten by the same fleas, the only truly equal thing in the Middle Ages. But teeth were only a small corner of the picture. Every part of the body had its own standard, and everyone came with a price. Foreheads had to be high enough to warrant plucking out every strand of fringe. Skin had to be so pale it looked like paper, even if it meant lead poisoning. Feet had to be small enough to keep you from walking fast, because a lady, they said, should never be in a hurry. The body had to be soft and fragile, which meant weak, dependent, and always in need of someone to protect or control. Today, you can choose your hairstyle, your skin tone, your body shape. Back then, choice existed only in the mouths of those more powerful than you. And you existed only to be looked at and to be judged. And the scariest part? Many of those standards never really died. They just transformed into a modern version, softer, shinier, but built on the same principle. To be accepted, you must bend yourself to fit the mold someone else made for you. Beauty back then didn't come from a smile. It came from the ability to control your face like a wax mask. And when you lost your first tooth, no one said, "It's okay. It happens to everyone." They looked at you as if you had just slipped down the social ladder, because you no longer met the standard of being beautiful even in silence. No one fixed a smile. They simply learned to turn their head to the side when speaking to hide the worst parts. Some women had to paint their lips in deep red, not to stand out, but to hide the cracks at the corners caused by malnutrition. And sometimes, when you saw someone speak so little, it wasn't shyness. It was simply too painful to open their mouth. A lady had to smile with her eyes. Smiling with her mouth was far too dangerous. Perhaps you've heard the phrase, "A smile is the most powerful weapon." In the Middle Ages, it was proof you didn't know how to keep your mouth shut. And you know the most ironic part? Those with bad teeth were often the ones who truly ate, worked, and lived. But in that society, truth was never praised. They didn't care if you were kind. They only cared that you didn't reveal teeth that had rotted over the years. Beauty, once again, wasn't found in life, but in the ability to hide decay. And that's why, even today, you might brush your teeth 3 times a day and still feel too insecure to laugh out loud. Because that fear, perhaps, has been inherited from ancestors who learned to stay silent in order to survive. A genuine smile can light up a room, but in the Middle Ages, it could snuff you out before you even stepped inside. If you think today's beauty standards are heavy, remember, at least you can still go to the dentist. Back then, one smile could end you, because to have that bright white smile, people used a cosmetic that made you more beautiful each day, while killing you bit by bit. Would you use it? Medieval women didn't have to ask themselves that question. They already used it, and they called it white powder. Main ingredient, lead, a heavy, toxic metal, extremely effective at making you pale as a freshly unearthed mummy. Skin white as porcelain, flawless, that was the ideal. As for the peeling skin and broken blood vessels under the powder, no one said a word. It starts with a mild headache. Then comes the fatigue, the sleepless nights, the hair falling out. After that, confusion, necrosis, and sometimes the heart simply stops. But as long as your makeup doesn't smudge when you faint, you're still considered beautiful. No one warns you, no one asks questions. Because if every woman suffers the same pain, then that pain becomes the standard. Some women powder their faces 3 times a day, each layer thicker than the last, until their skin is no longer skin, but a chemical mask. Lips painted with mercury for a natural flush. Eyes lined with soot mixed with tree resin, burning and cracking the cornea. If your skin turns red, just add more powder. If the powder stops sticking, smear egg whites over your face, like mortar on a wall. And then one day your skin changes color. Not from the powder, but from internal bleeding. Still, you keep wearing the makeup, because natural ugliness is not forgiven. They don't love you, they love the illusion you build with poison. If you can't breathe, cut the dose. If you vomit, take a day off. Then start again. Because that face is the only reason anyone listens to you. Ladies would sit perfectly still for hours just to keep the foundation from cracking, because a single fissure could ruin an entire marriage negotiation. Some women died of liver failure at 28. The doctors found no cause, but her mirror shone bright. They would say, "She's so beautiful, she doesn't even look human." They didn't know that was entirely true, because she was no longer human. Her skin didn't breathe, her pulse stuttered, her organs were dissolving inside her. And when she smiles in the oil painting, that is her most beautiful moment, because she's no longer alive to suffer. Makeup wasn't to hide imperfections. It was to erase the self. It was a silent war between the real face and the shadow society wanted you to become. Each day, you surrendered another piece of your body in exchange for a pleasing glance from someone else. And the cruel truth was, the weaker you became, the more they praised you for being gentle. A beautiful woman never complained, even when her insides screamed from the toxins building up. Some records note that noble women often sat near windows, not to catch a breeze, but to let the lead powder fade from purple back to pale. There were balls where 3 young ladies would collapse at once, and everyone kept dancing, assuming they were simply overcome with emotion. In reality, they no longer had enough oxygen to stand more than an hour in heavy gowns and lead masks. One young woman was buried at just 24. People said she was beautiful until her last breath. No one said she died because she wanted to be called pretty. The living kept powdering. The dead were painted white. Who could tell what was real? Back then, beauty was not life. It was the art of imitating death exquisitely. And if you think makeup today makes you tired, remember, at least you're not using chemicals straight from a mine. You still have a choice. You can wipe it off and breathe. In those days, they had no choice. To remove the paint was to erase your very existence in the eyes of others. Every morning, they didn't paint their faces because they liked it. They did it because they feared being forgotten. Because a bare face back then was not enough to be heard. People didn't remember your voice. They remembered the shade of your lips at the last banquet. And if you had nothing striking, they would paint it on you, even if the price was your final breath. You could call it a sacrifice for beauty, but in truth, it was a controlled burial. And sadly, it still continues, only now with prettier packaging and sweeter advertising. Among the strangest beauty standards humans have ever created, perhaps none surpassed: the forehead. In the Middle Ages, the higher the forehead, the greater the sign of intellect and refinement. Not the high forehead means smart, your grandmother might say, but shaving your hairline clean and plucking more just to be sure. Sometimes plucking all the way to the crown of the head, so that in profile you couldn't tell if the woman was a noble or had just joined a convent. It didn't stop there, they shaved the eyebrows too, because hair was considered too animal to keep on an aristocratic face. Some records even state, thick eyebrows are the mark of a shallow woman. They said it with complete seriousness. So women plucked until their skin was raw, eyes swollen, then painted back too thin arcs like the tremble of a pencil line. If you've ever been annoyed at uneven brows, try drawing them when your hands are shaking from anemia and the candlelight flickers. And if you ask, why not just keep the brows? The answer is simple, because that wasn't beautiful. Beauty had to be elaborate, painful, demanding. It had to keep you sitting for hours before a mirror, just to turn yourself into a less hairy version. That was the top half. As for the bottom, the standard demanded you be perfectly flat-chested. Not because that era liked strange aesthetics, but because large breasts were seen as vulgar, animalistic, and impossible to hide under a corset. They didn't call it beauty. They called it indecency of the body. Slender girls with narrow shoulders, arched backs, and flat chests were considered the perfect ideal. And if you blossomed naturally, congratulations, you just lost about a quarter of your marriage prospects. Some noble women even bound their chests from puberty to avoid growing beyond the allowed limit. Skin marks were nothing. Shortness of breath was tolerable. As long as you kept that pure silhouette. A beautiful woman must be fragile. That's what they said when you fainted from lack of oxygen. And they still applauded because your dress stayed in place. In a society where less was equated with nobility, you had to learn to shrink yourself, both literally and figuratively. Less hair, less flesh, less voice, but always more standards. In truth, every natural feature was treated with suspicion, as if having a living body was a flaw to be corrected. The ideal woman didn't need to be strong or even real, only to look, from a distance, like freshly polished stone. And in stone, of course, there are no muscles, no breasts, no hair, no expressions. They didn't beautify to celebrate a real face. They edited to erase it entirely. Many portraits from that era looked so alike you couldn't tell who was who, Because they all shared the same national beauty template. That template didn't allow gummy smiles, no freckles, no tucking your hair behind your ear unless a veil covered it first. You weren't allowed to be yourself. You had to be someone pre-programmed. So if you've ever thought a medieval lady looked noble, remember, she might have been nursing a headache, chest pains, and mild hunger. But as long as no one noticed, she was beautiful. And that was all that mattered. Now tell me, do you feel lucky to have eyebrows, to breathe freely, and to sit without squeezing your chest? Or is there still a part of you that wants to be perfect, even if the price is erasing the most human part of yourself? If you feel uneasy hearing this, good. At least you can still feel. And if you still think, then was prettier than now, let me ask you, are you ready to pluck all your hairline and bind your chest through the winter? Would you accept rejection just because your eyebrows grow the wrong way? Would you stand still for 4 hours just to have your face painted like a blinking mummy? Because that beauty wasn't allowed to live. It was only allowed to be looked at and remembered in paintings, where you could look like a true lady if no one looked too closely. And if you wonder why they all looked so eerily alike, maybe it's because they were all trying not to be themselves. The real question is, are you doing the same, with a different standard, a different era, but the same fear? Or are you ready to live with a real face, with hair, with breasts, with eyebrows, and with freedom? If you've ever complained about high heels hurting your feet, try imagining wearing shoes made of metal all winter. Noble shoes back then weren't made for walking. They were made to prove you didn't have to walk anywhere at all. Rigid soles, pointed toes, laces cutting deep into the skin. Each step like a silent contract that you will not run away. Wealthy women didn't walk slowly because it was graceful. They walked slowly because every step drew blood. If you saw a lady standing motionless in a corner, don't assume she was posing. She might simply be unable to turn. Beneath the gown was the corset, and beneath the corset was a body compressed like a tightly wrapped parcel. Tight enough to still breathe, barely. A corset cinched from the waist to the bust. Not to preserve a figure, but to create one. A figure that had never existed in nature. Had a big meal? Sorry, you weren't allowed to. The stomach had no space left. Need to pick up a dropped handkerchief? Impossible. Bending over meant risking a dislocated spine. The spine was no longer bone. It was a required curve, bent to the whim of a tailor you had never met. Some days you wanted to take a deep breath, but the corset allowed only existence, breathless and smiling. Then came the lace-up corset, the advanced level of self-distortion to fit a standard. The tighter the laces, the more arched the back, the smaller the waist, and the more scrambled the internal organs. Some women fainted mid-meal from poor circulation. Others didn't wake up at all. Few complained because before you died, you had already made a good impression. People praised, petite as a pocket watch, but no one asked, inside that watch were the gears breaking? You had to glide as you walked. In truth, you were just trying not to fall. Every time you sat down, you counted how many ribs were still intact. They dressed better back then, people say. Yes, if better means being unable to climb stairs. Noble women were never allowed to hurry, because if they ran, everything on them would break, literally and figuratively. Skirts so wide you needed attendants to hold them. Shoes so stiff you had to relearn how to walk. Corsets robbed you of sleep, and braids were woven so tightly that even sleep hurt. But as long as you looked good, who cared? Elegance in those days was silent endurance, the ability to stand for 4 hours without touching your stomach. This wasn't aesthetic taste. It was a control system through fabric, rope, and a mirror too small to show your whole self. You were forced to choose between comfort and existing in other people's eyes. Clothes weren't designed for you to move. They were designed for you to become smiling furniture. Your body was no longer yours. It belonged to the gaze. And that gaze did not accept folds, wrinkles, or irregular breaths. If you breathed too hard, you lacked refinement. If you leaned while sitting, you lacked discipline. If you sweated, you lacked class. They didn't care how you felt, only that you didn't disturb the bow at your waist. And if you wanted to rebel, you were an uncultured woman who didn't know beauty. Some girls got so used to pain, they stopped feeling it. They called it maturity. Some mothers taught their daughters to lace themselves tighter each morning, so they would understand self-worth. And some nights, a girl cried alone because her chest could no longer open the way it used to. But the next morning, she still donned the wig, slid her feet into iron shoes, and smiled with proper upbringing. It was beauty that warped the body, and then warped the emotions. Beauty was no longer freedom of expression. It was the ability to endure without anyone noticing. And if you still think people dressed better back then, let me ask, could you live a month without being able to bend down? Could you walk like a wooden statue just to be called graceful? Or would you choose to breathe, to eat, to walk quickly when you're late? Would you choose true beauty, or the kind that demands you lace yourself into deformity just to fit? In the Middle Ages, beauty standards were so strict that women were absolutely forbidden to sweat. Not because they weren't hot, of course they were, but because body odor was considered indecent. It didn't matter if you just hauled water, carried hay, or were wearing 6 layers of dress under the summer sun. You still had to smell lovely, but you weren't allowed to bathe often. Bathing too much was believed to be dangerous for both your health and your morals. Water, they thought, was a hiding place for evil spirits. And soap, that was for the sick or for prostitutes. So, how did they keep the scent? They sprinkled dried flowers into their skirts, hung little sachets of herbs inside their corsets, and prayed the wind blew in the right direction. If the smell still escaped, they blamed it on the kitchen fire, the chicken coop, the servants, anything but their own bodies. They wouldn't dare lift their arms above shoulder height, for fear that a slight rustle of fabric might release the forbidden scent. Can you imagine? Every step had to be taken lightly, not for grace, but so as not to stir up the real smell. And if you were caught having an odor, no one would tell you directly. They'd simply refuse to shake your hand. Fragrance became a kind of religion. A respectable woman was one who always carried the scent of flowers, even if she lived next to a pigsty. They used essential oils but only dabbed them on the wrists, never directly on the skin, lest they be seen as too wanton. Some women even placed dried petals between their fingers, so that every movement felt like living in a garden. But in truth, they were living in a state of slow decay. Every day was a battle of fragrance against biology. They sat by windows not to enjoy the view, but to release some of the heat trapped beneath their gowns in the summer sun. The thicker the dress, the more sweat it trapped. But the more it trapped, the calmer your face had to be, as if you didn't even have sweat glands. The itching, the rashes, the blisters, all hidden behind an educated smile. Men could breathe heavily, spit, wipe their foreheads. Women, they used silk handkerchiefs, dabbed lightly, and hid away the cloth soaked through with sweat. On windless summer nights, women lay still, not to sleep, but to avoid producing scent in their dreams. And if you think this is an exaggeration, remember, some women were removed from their own weddings for a strong odor when passing the altar. That society wanted you to smell good, but never to ask how to smell good. You had to manage it yourself. Smell yourself. Judge yourself. Punish yourself if you weren't spring meadow enough. If you dared to say the truth, that real humans have real smells, congratulations, you just became the joke of the tea party. People didn't need you to be perfect. They just needed you not to be unpleasant. And the human body, more often than not, is unpleasant. That's why they mixed lavender with urine to mask odors, because if it wasn't pleasant, at least it was unusual. Some ancestral recipes used vinegar with wine, or ash with ginger, sounding like magic, but born from desperation. And every time someone wrinkled their nose, you'd wonder, is it me? That panic drove you to sprinkle more, rub more, wrap more until your body could barely breathe, yet still wasn't fragrant enough. Today, you have deodorant, hot showers, and breathable fabrics. Back then, you had thick cloth, stifling rooms, and the expectation that you must always be like a freshly plucked flower. A flower that never wilts, never blooms, never sheds petals, just stands still for others to smell through glass. The scent had to be faint, sweet, and come from somewhere indeterminate, so long as it wasn't your own skin. because your body was unspeakable, and its scent unseeable. So tell me, have you ever felt suffocated by not being allowed to just be yourself? Or do you still believe a woman must smell sweet, without ever asking, sweet according to whose standard? Perhaps, in a world where everyone masks their true scent, the first person who dares to breathe freely is the true rebel. So what about you? Would you walk into a room without spraying perfume first? Or are you also quietly panicking, just in case someone finds out that you smell? So welcome. You've just uncovered another thin layer in the legacy of the Middle Ages. And it's not written in history books. It's hiding beneath the fabric you wear every day. After hearing about medieval beauty standards for women, you might be hoping that at least men had to suffer just as much. But no, the sad truth is, they didn't have to endure anything at all. The ideal man of the time didn't need muscles, didn't need charm, didn't even need to smell good. They only needed one thing: to look so idle that they could get fat without even trying. The bigger the belly, the rounder the face, the paler the skin, the stronger the proof you didn't belong in the rice fields. And if your hands had no calluses, you could give a little wave to the Duchess without being judged. If your skin was tanned, your back straight, and your teeth healthy, sorry, you looked like a mercenary, not a nobleman. They didn't like muscular men. They liked men like dough, soft, unresisting, and smelling faintly of power. The ideal model. Sitting all day without getting tired, eating all day without your robe strings getting in the way, beer belly without the beer, extra flesh without the sweat. That was the pinnacle. If a woman had to squeeze herself into a corset to look slim, a man could throw on a wide robe to hide every contour. Not for modesty, but so they could avoid exercise while still being called composed. They didn't have to tighten anything. Just walk slowly, speak softly, and eat in the style of, I'm not hungry, but I eat because I can. A 3-hour meal, grease on the lips, wine in the beard, and everyone called it manly. While a woman taking one bite of cake was judged, a man could devour the whole table and be praised as a connoisseur. No one told them to cover their armpits. No one required them to cinch their waist. No one was shocked if they snored at a banquet. In fact, the more carefree they were, the higher their status seemed, because only the powerful could afford not to care what others thought. They didn't have to maintain an image. They were the image. A plump gentleman, oily face, garlic breath, could still marry a beautiful wife, as long as he owned land. And don't forget, the double standard was such that his wife had to smell good to mask his smell. Some families were rich enough to hire people to fan them, not for cooling, but to blow away the husband's odor. And women had to pretend they didn't notice, while men pretended they never smelled at all. A man's scent wasn't criticized. It was called natural. A woman's scent? Lack of self-control. Men weren't taught how to live clean. They were taught how to live without asking permission. That girl tightened her corset until her chest turned purple to get married. That man? He just had to open his purse at the right moment. Love doesn't need appearances, they said, but really they only said that when they were the man. In paintings, gentlemen often wore big hats, loose robes, and sat with legs wide open, not for comfort, but because they didn't have to sit closed. Their ease was privilege. A round belly could open diplomatic doors. A double chin could be painted as a face full of benevolence. And a lifetime of laziness could be called a contemplative demeanor if your rings were big enough. So why did women have to flatten their stomachs, shave their feet, rouge their cheeks, brush their teeth with charcoal, and wear shoes barely big enough to stand in, but not walk? Because that society didn't need handsome men. It needed wealthy men. And women had to be beautiful enough to get noticed by them. No one demanded that male icons of the time have abs. But women had to have porcelain skin, velvet hair, and a silk-soft heart. There were girls of 16 married off to men of 60 simply because he speaks so eloquently. No one asked, "Do you love each other?" They only asked, "How many plots of land do you own?" And when a wife fainted from her corset, the husband would call the servant, instead of loosening the laces. That was medieval love. One sat doing nothing, the other sat perfectly still. One expanded his body, the other shrank hers until she almost disappeared. And they said, love back then was purer. Maybe because no one had enough breath left to argue. And you? Where do you think true love begins? With a look? Or with the name on the land deed? However it began, it usually ended the same. Both lying in the same dark, damp room, being bitten by the same fleas, the only truly equal thing in the Middle Ages. It didn't matter if you were a peasant or a noble. If you had blood and skin, you had lice. Lice didn't care about wealth. They only needed a warm enough body to lay eggs. And your body, fragrant or not, was still a 5-star hotel for them. Head lice lived in your hair, body lice in your clothes, bed bugs under the straw mattress. Nobody lived alone. Some burned straw every night, not for warmth, but to smoke the bugs out before sleep. Yet they always came back as if invited, sometimes in greater numbers, sometimes bringing friends. People learned to accept it. No one flinched at the sight of eggs clinging to a sleeve. They just plucked them off, brushed them away, and carried on with the ceremony. There was even a popular pastime, picking lice off each other, a sort of intimate bonding for unmarried couples. And if you caught a big one, that was good luck. If it burst, well, sorry for the image. In the bedroom, you never slept alone. You slept with bedbugs, flea bites, and the constant buzzing in your ear. If you ever itched for no reason, trust me, there was a reason. You just couldn't see it. Clothes were hung in the sun not to smell nice, but to bore the bugs into leaving. But they didn't get bored. They were loyal. They followed you through harvest, through weddings, through funerals. Some women had maggots growing in wounds without knowing, until they moved. Some gentlemen died of fever, only to be found with a flea nest under the fur collar. One bite from a disease-carrying louse could keep you bedridden for 2 weeks, with your memory gone. But who cared? Everyone had them. If you complained, people looked at you as if you were pretentious. Back then, endurance to itching was seen as a measure of patience and morality. Scratch hard in public and you were vulgar. Scratch lightly and you were refined. Over time, people learned to scratch with their eyes, or to accept itching as part of their personality. Some records say, God tests man with vermin to see who is worthy of sainthood. But no saint ever died from bedbugs. Only commoners, many of them. You'd wake up covered in bites. Ask, is it the bed? No, it's because you're still alive. Some smeared beeswax around their neck. Not for beauty, but to stop lice from climbing to the face. And you thought you were alone? No. There was an entire ecosystem under your skirt. They ate, laid eggs, died, and multiplied to the rhythm of your heartbeat. The pain from bites was never the worst part. The worst was catching one. And it was still moving. There were no pesticides, only silence, and hope that you'd still be conscious in the morning. People shared blankets with bedbugs and scalps with lice. There were special wooden racks for airing clothes, so the bugs could crawl out before you wore them again. That wasn't pest control. That was life. That was routine. That was in every fold of fabric. So when you sit there feeling a little itchy, remember, you live in a luxurious age. Luxurious because you can see a dermatologist, spray insect repellent, and change pillowcases weekly. In the past, changing the pillowcase meant flipping it over, hoping the other side had fewer eggs. But either way, bugs didn't choose sides. They only needed blood. And you have blood. So next time a bug flies past your dinner table, don't scream. Greet it the way your great-great-grandmother once did. Not everyone has a best friend, but everyone once had lice. And if you ever feel lonely in the middle of the night, remember, you might not be entirely alone. After all the corsets, the lead powder, the bite marks, and the hunger, what's left isn't beauty. It's silence. A silence stretching from dawn to dusk, from chapel to bedchamber, from mirror to tombstone. Women of that time didn't live to be loved. They lived to avoid being judged. No dreams, no choices, only a reputation fragile as a dusting of powder on the face. Each day was a trial. How much could you endure before collapsing? But you weren't allowed to collapse. You had to stand tall, smile, and pretend it was all virtue. No one asked if you were tired because in a world where true feelings were considered improper, the question didn't exist. A proper lady never needed help, even if she was gasping for air under gowns heavy as armor. She didn't complain. She didn't rebel. She didn't take the last bite at the banquet. She knew how to disappear while still being present. She was a scented shadow, a body without needs, a smile without a voice. Sometimes in the dark, she cried, silently, unseen, for no reason she could name, except exhaustion. Exhaustion from not being allowed to be herself. But in the morning, she wiped her eyes, fixed her hair, and stepped into another day without hope. They said, "Women are the weaker sex." But the truth is, they were strong enough to survive a system that crushed them to the bone. Men could be angry. Women could not. Men could fail. Women could not forget to tighten their waist. They carried every expectation as if it were destiny, never allowed to set it down. And if they did fall, people would say, "She wasn't strong enough to be the wife of a decent man." These women were not victims. They were survivors. Survivors in a world that believed beauty was your only reason to exist. Every blister, every crack, every bruise was proof that you had paid the price for your presence. You weren't praised for being intelligent. You were only accepted if you looked right. And if someone said, "She's as beautiful as an angel," that angel was never allowed to eat too much. There were no fat angels. No angels with thick eyebrows. No angels who dared to ask, "May I breathe for a moment?" Endurance was the measure of your worth. Basic needs were seen as weakness. And the bitterest part? It was often other women who enforced these rules, because they had been taught the same lesson. If you don't comply, you will be left behind. So you learn to survive by not reacting, not feeling, not needing anything. You turned yourself into an object. Easy to display, easy to control, easy to forget. And one day, no one asked how you felt, because they assumed you never had. Beauty then was not a reward. It was a punishment for those without the privilege of living honestly. A poet once wrote, "She was as beautiful as a marble statue," and that was meant as praise. No one asked, "Does she wish to move?" Perhaps you think, "It's different now." But look at how you still scold yourself for a small belly after dinner. How you apologize for going out without makeup. How you hold your breath in photos. Has the Middle Ages truly ended? Or have we simply traded corsets for face filter apps and compliments for little red heart icons? Are you truly free? Or have you just swapped one mold for another, softer, but still just as tight? And if tomorrow you stopped trying to be beautiful, who would still listen to you? Who would think you deserve to be here? That's the question no one teaches you to answer. Only to stay silent when someone stares too long. But you are still here, still breathing, still alive, still reading these words, which means you haven't given up on yourself. And maybe that is the most beautiful act of resistance a woman has ever created. Evening falls. The sun tilts, as if tired of witnessing it all. You sit at the edge of the bed, where the bedbug bites have not yet healed, and the smell of sweat mixed with stove ash lingers faintly beneath the fabric. No one asks what you've been through, because you're still fully dressed, and still breathing. You remove each layer of dress, slowly, as if peeling away each fragment of a role others forced upon you. Red marks from the corset cut into your waist. A dull ache runs through your back. Your neck stiff as stone. Your hands numb from a day spent never relaxing. On that face, powder still clings, though it means nothing now. Though no one is looking anymore. You raise a hand to your hair. It's dry, brittle, smelling of old vinegar. But you smooth it down anyway because you no longer know what else to do. A groan from somewhere, another woman removing her corset. Also thinking, is this living? The room is silent. Only the faint thump of a heart remains, as if it too is tired of beating for so long inside a cage. You lie down. The pillow is not soft, the mattress not flat, but at least you no longer have to smile. No need to keep up appearances. No need to press your thighs together. No need to hold your breath. Only breathing. even if it sounds like wind hissing through an old door crack. Another day ends, and you have survived, somehow, for whatever reason. Even if no one calls your name in their prayers, you pull the straw blanket to your chest, close your eyes. In your mind, only one sentence remains: tomorrow will be the same. Perhaps you'll dream if you have the strength. Perhaps you'll just drift off out of habit, not choice. Outside, the bedbugs begin to crawl. Lice slip past your collar. Your stomach growls like an old unwashed pot. But you're not afraid. Fear was worn away the first time you were told that ugliness is a sin. No more dreams. No more resistance. Only existence. Steady as the ticking of a clock without a face. And if someone were to ask, "What does beauty bring?" you would not answer right away. You would only remain silent, because you know. The price of that silence has been paid with tonight's sleep. Some people still say, "I wish I could live in the Middle Ages." They usually say that while sitting on a sofa, eating pizza, watching medieval dramas on a 4K screen. They love the long gowns, the wine feasts, the stone castles, things no one in the year 1325 was actually clean enough to enjoy. They imagine themselves as princesses, as knights, as people outside of time, never as someone scratching fleas all night. But the Middle Ages didn't cast roles. It threw you where it wanted, and you stayed there. No one asked your opinion. And most likely, you wouldn't live in a castle. You'd live under the kitchen stairs, by the hearth, with the rats. You wouldn't have lace dresses. You'd have 3 layers of heavy, musty cloth, damp in the spring. You wouldn't spend afternoons reading books. You'd be picking bugs out of your feverish child's hair after bathing them in freezing well water. You wouldn't get to choose your hairstyle. You'd pluck your eyebrows, pluck your hairline, starve yourself, and never complain, because surviving was already a privilege, and surviving beautifully was rarer than a breeze that actually smelled good. So, do you still want to go back to 1325? Not as someone watching it on a screen, but as someone real, hungry, itchy. If the answer is no, good. It means you're still sane. If the answer is yes, then welcome. You'll be given a bundle of straw, a corset, and 3 starter fleas. But if you're here in the year 2025, still feeling the pressure to be beautiful, to be pale, to be silent, then maybe you never really left the Middle Ages at all. The only difference is that now, the thing squeezing your waist might be a face filter app. The heavy dress is society's expectations. And the lessons in silence come from the sound of likes, not the voice of a priest. But you do have one thing they didn't, a choice. So if you think this video is worth remembering, like it, or don't. It's up to you. And if you just exhaled a little, knowing you don't have to live in 1325, then welcome back.